Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I grew up in a small town where nothing much happened. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and everyone knew everyone. There was one major road that ran through town, a single set of traffic lights, and an old railway crossing that hadn't been active in years. The crossing was barely noticeable, just rusty tracks embedded in the asphalt with an old wooden arm that was permanently stuck halfway down. No trains had run through since before I was born, but the town never bothered to remove it. It was just a forgotten relic, one that most people didn't even think about, except for him. I first noticed the man when I was in high school. He would stand near the railway crossing at odd hours of the day and night, staring down the tracks. He wasn't a homeless man, his clothes were always clean, and he carried himself with an unsettling stillness. He never asked for money, never spoke to anyone. He just stood there, watching the tracks. At first, I assumed he was just some old guy reminiscing. Maybe he had worked on the railroad back when it was running, but something about him always felt wrong. The way he never moved, the way his head tilted slightly, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. One night, I was coming back from a friend's house when I had to pass by the crossing. The street was empty, and the street lights barely lit the cracked pavement. As I approached, I saw him standing there again, his back to me, facing the tracks. I don't know why, but my stomach dropped. Maybe it was because I had never seen him move before, but this time, as I walked past, he turned his head, not all the way, just enough for me to see the side of his face. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. I hurried past, pretending I hadn't noticed. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just muttering to himself, but I started paying more attention after that, and the more I watched, the more I realized something terrifying. The man was always there, no matter the time, morning, noon, or midnight. Whenever I passed that crossing, he was standing there, and he never left. One night, after a late shift at work, I decided to test something. I parked my car near the crossing and waited. An hour passed, then two. He didn't move. It was past midnight when my eyelids grew heavy. Just as I was about to give up and go home, I glanced at the crossing. He was gone. I sat up straight, my heart hammering. I hadn't looked away for more than a few seconds, but the man had vanished. The track stretched empty under the dim glow of the streetlights. Then I heard it, a long, distant whistle, low and echoing, like the sound of a train. But that was impossible. The tracks were abandoned. I didn't wait to find out more. I started my car and sped home, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. The next day, I told my dad about it. He frowned and rubbed his chin. The man at the crossing. He said slowly. I nodded. He exhaled sharply. Son, that crossing hasn't been used in 50 years. I know, I said, but no, listen. His face had gone pale. Back in the 70 seconds, there was an accident. A man was standing on the tracks when a train came through. He didn't move, just stood there, watching. My skin went cold. They say the conductor saw him. My dad continued. He blew the horn, hit the brakes, but it was too late. The train passed right through him. When it stopped, there was nothing left. I swallowed hard, and after that, Dad hesitated. People say he never left. I moved away for college a year later. When I came back to visit, I made a point to avoid the crossing. I didn't want to see him again, but last summer, I drove through town late at night. My route took me past the old tracks, and out of morbid curiosity, I glanced over. The man was still there, standing at the crossing. I tried to shake the feeling of dread that followed me home that night. The man at the crossing was still there, still waiting. For what? I didn't know. I told myself I was done with it, that I would never drive that way again, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I decided I needed to know more. Maybe it was stupid, but the way my dad had spoken about the accident, the way he'd gone pale when he realized what I was talking about, it felt like there was more to the story. I started asking around town. Most people brushed me off, others got quiet when I mentioned the man. One old woman at the diner even told me best to leave some things alone, dear. But then I found Sam. Sam was an old-timer, the kind who had lived in town his whole life. When I brought up the man at the crossing, he didn't laugh or wave me off. He just nodded slowly and took a long sip of his coffee. You're not the first to see him, he said, and you won't be the last. I lay dead. What happened? My dad told me about an accident, but Sam set down his cup. His hands were shaking. It wasn't just an accident. I felt a chill creep up my spine. The man on the tracks. Sam hesitated. He wasn't just some poor soul who got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He wanted to be there. He stepped onto those tracks himself, stood there, staring down the train like he was waiting for it. I swallowed hard. The conductor saw him. Clear as day, Sam continued. Said he locked eyes with him right before impact, but when the train passed through, he shook his head. No body, no blood, no nothing. A lump formed in my throat. They searched for days, dug up the tracks, checked every inch of the area, but he was just gone. I sat back in my seat, trying to process what I was hearing. So what? He just disappeared. Sam sighed. Depends on who you ask. I frowned. What do you mean? He glanced around as if making sure no one else was listening. Then he leaned in close. Some folks say he never left. The cold not formed in my stomach. They say he's still there. Sam murmured, watching, waiting, listening for something only he could hear. My mouth went dry. Waiting for what? Sam met my eyes, his expression grim. For the next train. The next train. Those words echoed in my head long after I left the diner. I tried to push them away, to tell myself it was just an old ghost story. But deep down, I knew better. I decided then and there I was done. No more late night drives. No more looking for answers. I would never go near that crossing again. And for a while, I kept that promise. Until last night, I was driving home late when I found myself on that familiar stretch of road. I hadn't meant to go that way, but my usual route was blocked due to construction, and this was the only other option. I told myself it was fine. I would just drive past, keep my eyes on the road, and not look. But as I neared the crossing, something felt off. The air was heavy, thick, like the world was holding its breath. The street lights flickered, and my radio crackled with static. Then I heard it, a low, distant whistle. My hands tightened on the wheel. No, that wasn't possible. There were no trains. I hit the gas, heart pounding. I just needed to get past the crossing, get home. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, standing at the edge of the tracks, just as still as ever. But this time, he was facing me, his head tilted, his lips moving silently, and then he stepped onto the tracks, right in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching. My heart hammered in my chest as my car came to a violent stop just inches from where he stood. Except, there was no one there. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The road was empty. The man was gone. Then, from the radio, through the static, I heard something else. A voice, a whisper. Not yet. I didn't wait to hear more. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped all the way home, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. I don't know what he wants. I don't know what he's waiting for. But I do know this. I never want to meet him again. And if you ever find yourself driving down an old road at night, near an abandoned crossing, do yourself a favor. Don't stop. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. The way he turned to face me, the way his lips moved silently. And worst of all, the whisper on the radio. Not yet. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, stress, lack of sleep, but I knew that wasn't true. I knew what I saw, and I had a horrible feeling that it wasn't over. The next morning, I checked my car. The brakes, the tires, everything was fine. No evidence that anything had been on the road in front of me. No footprints near the tracks. It was as if it had never happened. But I knew better. I decided I needed to leave town for a few days, clear my head. So I packed a bag and drove to stay with a friend a few towns over. I avoided the crossing, taking the long way around. Every time I passed railroad tracks, worky ones, I felt a shiver go down my spine. I stayed away for a week, told myself I was safe, that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Then, on the last night of my trip, my friend and I were watching TV when my phone rang. No caller ID. At first, I wasn't going to answer, but something about the way my stomach dropped made me press accept. I lifted the phone to my ear. For a moment, there was only static. Then, just barely audible over the noise, a voice, a whisper. Not yet. I hung up so fast my hand shook. My friend saw my face and asked what was wrong. I didn't have an answer, because how do you explain something like this? How do you tell someone that someone was following you? I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I made up an excuse and drove home. The whole way back, I had the overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone, that if I looked in the rearview mirror, I would see something I did not want to see. By the time I reached my town, the feeling had only gotten worse. I should have kept driving, should have just left, but I didn't. I went home, locked my doors, and tried to go about my life. For a while, everything seemed normal. No strange calls, no whispers, no sightings of the man at the crossing. Then, last night, I woke up at exactly 3:12 a.m. The room was silent, too silent, no crickets outside, no hum of the fridge from the kitchen, just silence, and then a long, distant whistle. I froze. No. It wasn't real. There were no trains. Then my phone lit up on my nightstand. No caller ID. I stared at it, heart hammering. It rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, it stopped. I let out a shaky breath. Then my phone buzzed with a message. It was just one word. Soon. I haven't left my house since. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what he's waiting for. But I know that I don't have much time. I don't know if this is a warning or a promise. But if you ever see a man standing standing near an abandoned crossing, staring at tracks that haven't seen a train in years. Keep driving, don't stop, don't look, and if your phone rings in the middle of the night, don't answer. I was working as a night security guard at a small office building. It wasn't a big, fancy place, just a 4-story building with a few businesses renting space inside. During the day, it was busy with accountants, insurance agents, and a few tech startups. But at night, it was dead silent. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I mostly just sat at the front desk, watched security monitors, and occasionally walked through the building to make sure everything was locked up. It was easy money, but there was always something eerie about being the only person in a place that was meant to be full of people. One night, around 2 a.m., the phone at the front desk rang. That was unusual. The internal phones in the building only worked for office-to-office calls. The front desk phone shouldn't have been able to receive outside calls at all. I picked it up. Hello. Silence. I listened for a few seconds, thinking maybe it was a bad connection. But there was nothing. No static, no breathing, no background noise. Just dead air. I hung up. A few minutes later, it rang again. I hesitated before answering. Front desk. Again, silence. This time, I didn't hang up right away. I waited, listening. After about 30 seconds, I heard something faint, barely audible. A whisper. I couldn't make out words, just the soft, rhythmic sound of someone speaking too quietly for me to understand. Then the line went dead. I was officially creeped out. I checked the security cameras, but everything looked normal. No movement in the halls, no doors open that shouldn't be. Just an empty office building in the middle of the night. I told myself it was a glitch. Maybe one of the office phones had a bad connection and was randomly dialing out. It wasn't a good explanation, but it was better than any alternative I could think of. An hour passed, then at exactly 3 a.m., the phone rang again. I stared at it, dread pulling in my stomach. I didn't want to answer, but I did. This time, as soon as I picked up, I heard breathing, slow, deliberate, then a whisper, clear this time, right next to my ear. Come upstairs. I slammed the phone down so hard it echoed through the empty lobby. My pulse was racing. I checked the cameras again. Still nothing, but something felt wrong. I was suddenly aware of just how quiet the building was. Too quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you, making you feel like you're not alone even when you are. I don't know what made me do it, but I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, and took the elevator to the second floor. The doors opened with a ding, and I stepped out into the dimly lit hallway. Nothing. I checked each floor, one by one. Every office was locked. Every hallway was empty. There was no sign that anyone had been there. Finally, I reached the 4th floor. The second I stepped out of the elevator, the phone at the front desk downstairs started ringing again. I froze. I was the only person in the building. The phone was ringing, and I wasn't there to answer it. The ringing stopped. Then, from somewhere down the darkened hallway, I heard a door click open. I didn't wait to see which one. I bolted back to the elevator, practically punching the button to go down. The doors took forever to close, and for a split second, I swore I saw a shadow move at the end of the hall. I spent the rest of my shift locked in the security office, watching the cameras. Nothing moved. No more calls came in at 6 a.m. When the first employees arrived, I practically ran to my car. I quit that job a week later. I never found out who or what was trying to get me to come upstairs that night. I tried to forget about that night, told myself it was just a weird coincidence, a mix of exhaustion and paranoia playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. Something had been there, and it wasn't done with me. A week after I quit, I got a new job at a hotel doing overnight front desk work. It wasn't much different. Long, quiet hours and occasional strange guests, but at least I wasn't alone. There were always at least a few other employees on shift. I told myself I was safe. Then, one night, around 3 a.m., the hotel phone rang. I picked it up without thinking. Come upstairs. My blood turned to ice. The voice was the same, a whisper, clear and deliberate. I slammed the phone down and looked around the lobby, suddenly feeling exposed. My coworker, Jason, was at the other desk, half asleep. He barely looked up. Wrong number, he muttered. I didn't answer, just grabbed the receiver and checked the call log. There was nothing. No incoming call. No record of the number. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, maybe some guest messing with me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was something else. The rest of my shift passed in agonizing silence. I kept glancing toward the elevators, half expecting to see someone or something standing there waiting, but nothing happened. Not that night. The next night, though, I got another call. I hesitated before answering, dread pulling in my stomach. Hello. Silence. Then, after a long pause, the whisper, "Why did you leave?" I slammed the phone down again. This time, Jason noticed. "Dude, what's wrong?" I swallowed hard. Nothing, I muttered. Just spam call. I don't know why I lied. Maybe because I didn't want to say it out loud, saying it would make it real. I checked the call log again. Nothing. That was the last night I worked at the hotel. I didn't even finish my 2 weeks notice. I told them I was sick and never came back. For months, I refused to work night shifts. I avoided anything that reminded me of that office building. I'd even changed my number, hoping that somehow it would keep the calls from finding me. For a while, it worked, until last night. I was at home, in bed, when my phone buzzed. I reached for it groggily, assuming it was a wrong number, but when I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. No caller ID. I stared at it, my heart pounding. It rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, it stopped. A few seconds later, a voicemail notification popped up. My hand shook as I pressed play. At first, there was only static, then the whisper, "Come upstairs." I don't have an upstairs. I live in a single-story apartment. I didn't sleep last night. Every creak, every distant sound made my skin crawl. I kept checking my bedroom door, expecting to see it open on its own. I don't know what it wants. I don't know how it's still following me. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept my phone turned face down, refusing to check if another call would come. Every tiny noise in my apartment felt like a warning. The creak of the pipes, the hum of the fridge, the occasional shifting of the building itself. Each sound made my pulse spike. I checked the door locks 5 times, made sure every window was shut, but I still didn't feel safe. That voicemail, "Come upstairs." I don't have an upstairs. So what the hell did it mean? 3:12 a.m. I must have dozed off at some point, because when I opened my eyes, my phone screen was glowing. 1 missed call, no caller ID. I stared at it, my breath coming in short gasps. Then, before I could even process what was happening, a notification, a voicemail. I didn't want to listen. Every instinct in me screamed "Don't," but my hand moved on its own. I pressed play. Silence. Then the whisper, closer this time, more deliberate. "You left the door open." My stomach twisted into a knot. I shot up in bed, my eyes darting to the front door. I knew I had locked it. I had checked it over and over, but my bedroom door was open. I was sure I had closed it before going to bed. I never sleep with it open. A lump of cold fear settled in my chest. I grabbed the baseball bat I keep by my bed and crept toward the doorway, my breath shallow. My apartment was small, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room with a tiny kitchen. From where I stood, I could see the front door. It was still locked, but the chain latch was undone. My skin crawled. Something wasn't here. I backed up, moving toward my phone to call someone, anyone, when I heard it. A soft creak from the closet, the one just outside my bedroom door. My legs locked up. I gripped the bat tighter, forcing myself to take 1 slow step forward. The closet door wasn't open, but something was off. The air in the apartment felt thick, heavy, like something was waiting. I raised my hand to the doorknob. Then, my phone buzzed. I jumped so hard I nearly dropped the bat. No caller ID. I turned to grab it, heart hammering. The second I picked it up, the closet door creaked open behind me. I spun around, swinging the bat instinctively. Nothing. The closet was empty. I stood there, panting, bat raised, feeling like I was losing my mind. Then I noticed my phone screen. The call had ended. Another voicemail. With shaking hands, I pressed play. At first, just static. Then, "Found you." The voice was right next to the speaker, like someone had whispered directly into my phone. I dropped it. I was done. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and ran out the door, not stopping until I was in my car with the doors locked. I didn't go back. I crashed at a friend's place for the night, making up some excuse about a gas leak in my apartment. I didn't check my phone again until morning. There were no missed calls, no new voicemails. I travel a lot for work, which means I've stayed in more hotels than I can count. Most of them blurred together, beige walls, generic artwork, the faint smell of industrial cleaning supplies. Nothing special, but this one, I'll never forget it. It was a last-minute booking. My flight got delayed, and by the time I landed, it was past midnight. The usual chain hotels were fully booked, so my company put me up in a smaller, older hotel near the airport. It wasn't run down, but it definitely had a different vibe. The lobby was dimly lit. The receptionist barely looked up as she slid me my key, and the elevator creaked the entire way up to the 3rd floor. When I reached my room 319, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The door looked normal. The keycard worked fine, but the second I stepped inside, I felt like I was intruding, like I wasn't supposed to be there. The air was thick, almost damp. The room smelled slightly stale, like it hadn't been aired out in a while. The bed was neatly made, the lamps were on, but the longer I stood there, the stronger the feeling grew. Something wasn't right. I dropped my bag and went to close closed the curtains. That's when I noticed it. The closet door. It was open, just a crack. I never sleep with open doors. It's a weird thing I've had since childhood. So without thinking, I walked over and pushed it shut. The latch didn't catch. It swung back open about an inch. I frowned and tried again. Same thing. The third time, I made sure to press it firmly, waiting to hear the soft click of the latch. Satisfied, I turned away, and the door slowly creaked open behind me. I stared at it. My stomach twisted. Okay, old building. Maybe the floor was uneven, or there was a draft. I wasn't going to freak myself out over something silly. I left it alone and went to take a shower, trying to shake the weird feeling. The water was lukewarm at best, and the pressure was awful. Just my luck. But then, I heard it. A soft rustling, not from outside, from inside the room. I turned off the water, heart pounding. Silence. I stood there, dripping, listening so hard my ears rang. Then, just as I started to convince myself I was imagining things, a soft, deliberate tap on the bathroom door, not a knock. A tap, like someone testing the surface with their fingernail. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I was alone. The door was locked. Right, slowly, as quietly as I could, I reached for the handle. My fingers trembled as I turned it, yanking the door open. Nothing. The room was empty. The closet door was wide open. My bag was on the floor, unzipped. That was it. I was done. I threw on my clothes, grabbed my stuff, and bolted out the door. I nearly ran into the receptionist as I reached the front desk, out of breath and shaken. I need a new room, I stammered. The receptionist, still barely looking up, just sighed. 319, she asked. My stomach dropped. Yeah, she didn't ask why, didn't act surprised, just handed me a new key card without another word. I barely slept that night. The next morning, as I was checking out, I finally asked, "What's wrong with that room?" She paused, then, in the same flat tone, she said, "No one's supposed to be in 319. I blinked. What do you mean? You checked me in there." She shook her head. "It's been out of service for months." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying, but it was clean. The bed was made. The lights were on. She just gave me a tired look. Housekeeping stopped going in there a long time ago. I left that hotel as fast as I could, but something about that last conversation stayed with me. No one's supposed to be in 319. Then who or what was in there with me? For months, I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was just an old building with quirks, that maybe the receptionist was just messing with me, or that there was some logical explanation I hadn't considered. But deep down, I knew better. And the worst part, I don't think it was done with me. 2 weeks after my stay at that hotel, I was back on the road for work. This time, a different city, a different hotel, a much nicer one. Big, corporate, brightly lit, nothing creepy about it. I checked in, went up to my room, and settled in for the night. At around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of something rustling. I sat up, groggy, heart already pounding. The room was dark except for the faint glow from the street lights outside. The rustling sound came again. I turned toward the source. The closet door was open. Not just open, cracked, exactly the way it had been in room 319. My breath caught in my throat. I was sure I had closed it before going to bed. I stared at the sliver of darkness inside, my mind racing. My first instinct was to turn on the light, but something stopped me, because deep inside that closet, just barely visible in the darkness, I saw movement, a slow, subtle shift, like someone was standing there, rocking ever so slightly, watching. I grabbed my phone, heart hammering, and flipped on the flashlight. Nothing. The closet was empty, but the air inside felt thick, stale, just like in that other room. I shut the door, locked it, and sat on the edge of my bed, wide awake until the sun came up. It was happening again. The next time was in my own apartment. I had just come home from another work trip, exhausted and half asleep. I tossed my bag onto the floor and collapsed onto my bed without even changing. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up freezing. My bedroom door was open. I was sure I had closed it, but that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was my closet. The door, which I never leave open, was cracked, and from inside, I heard breathing. Slow, shallow, like someone trying not to be heard. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just lay there, staring at that inch of darkness. Then, from deep inside, I heard it. A tap, soft, deliberate, like a fingernail against wood. I shot out of bed, turned on every light, and threw open the closet door. Nothing, just my clothes, my shoes, the usual. But the air inside felt wrong, thick, heavy, and for some reason, I had the overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I did something I never thought I would do. I moved. For a while, things were quiet. No weird noises. No open doors. No feeling of being watched. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, whatever had been following me was gone. Then, last night, it happened again. I was staying in yet another hotel, halfway across the country for work. This time, I double-checked everything. I made sure the closet was shut before I went to bed. At exactly 3:19 a.m., I woke up. The air was cold. The room was silent, and the the closet door was cracked open, my heart pounded in my chest. Then, from the darkness inside, I heard it, a whisper, "Why did you leave?" I read, "I don't know what it is. I don't know how it keeps finding me, but I know one thing. I should have never opened that closet door in room 319. I don't know how to start this because I don't know how it ends. It's been 2 years since my stay in room 319. 2 years of running, avoiding certain hotels, certain rooms, certain closets. I thought movie would help. I thought staying in different places, never settling, would keep it from finding me. But I was wrong, and now I think I'm out of time. And after my last encounter, I moved halfway across the country, changed jobs, and started sleeping with every light on. I avoided hotels whenever I could, and when I had no choice, I triple checked every door before going to sleep. For a while, nothing happened. Then, a few months ago, I started waking up at 3:19 a.m. every night. Not to any sound, not to anything obvious, just awake. Every time, my heart would be hammering like I had just been running. And every time, I felt watched. I started keeping my phone by my bed, checking the time immediately when I woke up. Always 3:19 a.m. Then, last month, I woke up, heart pounding, sweating, but I didn't check my phone right away, because this time, something was wrong. The air felt thick, like the pressure in the room had changed. My body was frozen, every hair on my skin standing up, and then, slowly, I became aware of a sound. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even close. It was a whisper, faint, garbled, coming from inside my closet. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the door. It was closed. I knew it was. I checked it before bed, but as I lay there, not moving, not even blinking, it creaked, the softest sound, barely audible, like something shifting behind it, and then a single, deliberate tap. My phone buzzed on my nightstand. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I grabbed it, fumbling to turn on the screen. No caller ID. My breath caught in my throat. Then, one new voicemail. I didn't want to listen. I didn't want to listen, but my thumb moved on its own, hitting play. At first, static. Then, he left the door open. I threw the phone. It hit the wall and shattered, but I didn't care, because at that exact moment, my closet door swung open, and something stepped out. I don't remember grabbing my keys. I don't remember opening my apartment door, but somehow, I was suddenly outside, barefoot, in the freezing night air. I drove to a friend's place, banged on the door until he let me in, wide-eyed and half asleep. I didn't explain anything. I couldn't. I just told him I couldn't go home. Not yet. I stayed on his couch for a week. When I finally went back to my apartment, I did not go inside alone. I brought another friend with me. The lights were still on and my broken phone was still on the floor, but the closet door, it was shut, and taped to it with a single piece of masking tape was a note, scrawled in messy, unfamiliar handwriting. 4 words, "You can't keep running. I moved again. I don't answer unknown calls. I don't stay in hotels, and I never ever sleep with the closet open, but it doesn't matter, because last night, in my new apartment, in a city I've never been to before, I woke up at 3:19 a.m. My phone was buzzing, no caller ID, and this time, I heard it before I even picked up. The whisper, not from my phone, not from outside, but from inside the closet, closer than ever. I had a layover at a small regional airport late at night. You know the kind, just a handful of gates, dim lighting, and no flights scheduled after 10 p.m. I was on my way home from a business trip, exhausted, and my next flight wasn't until morning. Rather than book a hotel, I figured I'd just stay in the terminal. I'd done it before in bigger airports, and while it wasn't comfortable, it was manageable. By 11:30 p.m., the place was practically deserted. The last flight had left, the shops were closed, and the only sounds were the occasional announcement over the speakers and the distant hum of cleaning machines. Even security had retreated somewhere. I assumed an office near baggage claim. I settled into one of those rigid, armrest-divided chairs, plugged in my phone, and tried to get comfortable. That's when I noticed him, a man sitting about 4 rows ahead of me, facing the windows that overlooked the dark tarmac. I hadn't seen him before, and I was sure I was alone just minutes ago. He was dressed in a gray suit, slightly wrinkled, with a thin black tie. His posture was rigid, hands resting on his knees. He didn't have luggage, no phone, nothing in front of him, just staring straight ahead. I assumed he was another stranded passenger, but something about him unsettled me. Maybe it was the stillness. People waiting for flights usually shift around, check their phones, sigh in frustration. But he didn't move. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself I was overthinking things. I put in my earbuds and pulled my hoodie over my head, trying to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. At some point, curiosity got the better of me. I glanced over at him again. He was still there, still staring, but now, his head was turned slightly, just enough that I could tell he was was looking at me. A slow, creeping unease crawled up my spine. I looked away, pretending not to notice, but my heartbeat had picked up, and I was suddenly hyper-aware of how empty the terminal was. I checked the time, 2:07 a.m. That's when I heard it. A whisper. It was faint, almost like wind through a crack in the window, but unmistakable. It was coming from this direction. I pulled out one earbud. The whispering continued, soft, indistinct, a murmuring sound, like someone speaking just below the threshold of comprehension. I was frozen. Every instinct screamed at me not to turn around, but I had to. When I did, he was standing, not facing me, still facing the dark windows, but closer than before. He hadn't made a sound when he stood up. No rustle of fabric, no footsteps, just standing. The whispering had stopped. I was officially done. I grabbed my backpack and moved, trying to act casual, heading toward the restroom, anything to put distance between us. I locked myself in a stall, breathing heavily, trying to collect myself. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I debated just staying there until morning. Eventually, I cracked the stall door open. The restroom was empty. Stepping cautiously back into the terminal, I looked around. He was gone. The chair where he had been sitting was empty. The whole terminal was empty. But here's the thing, there was only one way out. Past me. I never heard footsteps. Never saw him leave. I stayed awake the rest of the night, watching, waiting. No one else appeared until 5 a.m. when the first airport staff arrived. The relief I felt when the first employees arrived was overwhelming. I practically ran to the small airport cafe the moment it opened, just to be around people again. The barista gave me a tired but polite smile as she handed me my coffee. I wanted to ask her something, anything, about whether she'd ever seen something strange in the terminal at night, but I hesitated. What was I supposed to say? Hey, have you ever seen a man in a gray suit who appears and disappears without a sound? I sipped my coffee in silence, convincing myself that I was just overtired, that my brain had played tricks on me. By 6:30 a.m., the terminal had returned to life. Passengers shuffled in, dragging their suitcases, chatting groggily with travel companions. Flight announcements crackled over the intercom. The strange stillness of the night was gone, replaced by the normal, comforting chaos of an airport morning. I checked my boarding pass. My flight was on time, departing from gate 8. I grabbed my bag and started toward it, pushing the night's events to the back of my mind. And then I saw him again, if not sitting this time, standing near the far end of the terminal, just past security, too far for me to make out his expression, but I knew it was him. The same gray suit, the same stiff posture, his hands still resting at his sides, fingers slightly curled. He wasn't looking at me, not directly, but he was aware of me. I froze. My instincts screamed at me to keep walking, to board my plane and never look back, but something in me needed to confirm what I was seeing. I took a slow step forward, and he did too. Not toward me, not away, just a single, almost imperceptible shift in position, as if he were acknowledging my movement. The chill ran down my spine. The whispering from last night echoed in my memory, and suddenly I wanted to be anywhere but there. I forced myself to look away, kept walking, and out to my gate. Boarding began, and I all but ran onto the plane, gripping my ticket like a lifeline. I didn't let myself relax until the aircraft doors sealed shut and we lifted into the sky. Only then did I look out the window, half expecting to see him standing at the gate, watching. But there was nothing. I told myself that was the end of it, that I had escaped whatever I'd experienced in that terminal. And for a while, I believed it. It was 3 days later when the first one came. I was back home, still shaken but trying to put it behind me. My phone buzzed with an unknown number, no caller ID. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. I put the phone to my ear, silence, and then a whisper, faint, indecipherable, just like in the terminal. I hung up immediately, my heart pounding, tried to tell myself it was a prank, a wrong number, anything rational, but the calls kept coming, not often, not every day, just enough to keep me on edge. Sometimes it was once a week, sometimes longer, always the same, silence, then whispering, and no matter how many times I changed my number, they always found me. For the first few months, I did my best to ignore it. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I kept my phone on silent at night. I even changed my number twice, but it didn't matter. The calls continued, always the same, silence, then the whispering. I tried to record it once, but my phone never picked up anything beyond the static of an empty line. It was like the sound only existed for me. The worst part, the calls were the least of it. It started small, a shadow moving in my peripheral vision when I was home alone, the feeling of being watched, even when my curtains were drawn, doors that I swore I'd closed standing slightly ajar when I looked back. Then came the airport sightings. At first, I avoided traveling altogether, terrified that I'd see him again, but eventually, life forced me to fly for work. Each time I stepped into an airport, my chest tightened with dread, scanning every terminal, every waiting area. I never saw him directly, but I felt him. I would walk through a crowd and suddenly feel that same stillness from that night in the empty terminal. I would glance up at a reflection in a glass panel and swear I saw the shape of someone standing motionless, just out of focus. One time, during a layover, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and froze, because in the background, in the dimly lit row of stalls behind me, there was a figure standing there. Gray suit, black tie, but when I turned around, nothing. I stopped sleeping well. The calls, the shadows, the airport encounters. It was wearing me down. I couldn't tell if I was being haunted or hunted, but I knew one thing. It wasn't over. The final straw came 6 months after that first encounter. I had just gotten home from a work trip, exhausted and relieved to finally be away from airports for a while. I dumped my suitcase by the door, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto my couch. That's when my phone rang. No caller ID. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't answer. It rang again and again. Each time, I let it go to voicemail. Finally, the ringing stopped. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. I needed to sleep. Maybe if I just ignored it long enough, it would go away. But then my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. I hesitated before pressing play. For the first few seconds, it was just silence. Then, not whispering, breathing, slow, deliberate, and then a single, distorted phrase spoken so softly it barely registered. Turn around. My entire body went cold. I sat there, gripping my phone so hard my fingers ached. My mind screamed, don't do it, but some awful, compulsive part of me had to know. I turned my head, and he was standing at the doorway to my living room, close enough that I could see the slight wrinkle in his suit, the way his hands twitched slightly at his sides. His face, I still can't describe it, not because I don't remember, but because my brain refuses to process what I saw. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and then I blinked, and he was gone. I don't live in that apartment anymore. I packed up that night and never went back. I moved states, got a new job, a new number. I haven't been on a plane since. For a long time, I thought it was over, and then last week, I got an email from an unknown sender. No subject, no message, just an image attached, a photo of an empty airport terminal, and in the background, slightly blurred but unmistakable, a man in a gray suit. I stared at the email for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. There was no name, no sender information, just the image, the empty terminal, and him. I wanted to delete it, block the address, pretend I never saw it, but my curiosity, my fear won. I clicked to enlarge the image. The terminal was dimly lit, like it had been that night. The city was the same, the windows looking out onto the darkened tarmac. I scanned every inch of the image, my stomach in knots, dreading the moment my eyes landed on him. And then I saw him, not standing in the distance, not lurking in the shadows, but closer than before. The blurred effect in the background wasn't because of the camera, it was because he was in motion. Stepping forward, I shut my laptop so fast I nearly knocked it off the table. My pulse thundered in my ears. He was moving. That meant something. I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow in my apartment felt wrong. Every creak in the floorboards made my heart slam against my ribs. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had been too afraid to consider. What happens when he finally reaches me? The next morning, I woke to another email. No subject, no message, just another image, a screenshot of a boarding pass, my name, a flight number, a departure time, tonight, 11:47 p.m. No return ticket, no destination listed. I checked the airline's website. The flight number didn't exist. I was shaking now. My breath came in uneven gasps. I gripped my phone, staring at the screen, my mind screaming at me to ignore it, to turn off my device, to pretend none of this was happening. But then, a notification popped up. Your ride is arriving. A rideshare. I hadn't ordered one. I looked outside. A black car idled by the curb. I didn't move. The driver didn't either. The app showed no driver name, no details. Just, en route to airport. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe I was too tired to keep running. Maybe I just knew I didn't have a choice. I grabbed my bag, the one I always kept half packed out of habit, slipped on my jacket, took one last look at my apartment, knowing I'd never see it again. Then I stepped outside. The back door of the car opened before I even reached it. I hesitated, looked up at the rearview mirror. The driver wasn't visible, just a dark shape, slightly out of focus. Just like him, I slid into the seat. The door shut on its own. The car pulled away from the curb. The city blurred past. The lights smeared together, stretching like reflections on wet pavement. The street sign stopped making sense. I couldn't tell where we were going. The further we drove, the quieter everything became. Then, finally, the terminal. The car stopped. The door unlocked. I stepped out. The airport was empty. No staff. No travelers. No announcements over the speakers. Just silence. And him waited, standing just beyond the glass doors, inside the terminal, hands at his sides, posture rigid, watching. I walked toward it, and the door slid open. A boarding call crackled over unseen speakers. Final call for passenger. It spoke my name, and then nothing. I don't know where I am now, or maybe I do. The terminal is always empty. The windows look out onto a tarmac that never changes. No planes, no movement, just him. He doesn't whisper anymore. He He just watches, and every night, a new flight number appears on the screen, a name is called, and someone else arrives. I used to think this was about me, that I was special, chosen, hunted, but now I understand. I wasn't the first, and I won't be the last. The terminal is always open. I was working at a maritime museum in a small coastal town, the kind that mostly catered to tourists during the summer. One of my tasks was closing up the exhibit hall in the evening, which included checking the interactive displays, turning off projectors, and locking the side doors that led out toward the docks. The museum had an old ferry on display, a real one decommissioned decades ago, sitting permanently moored behind the building. It wasn't open for tours, but sometimes we allowed special groups to walk through it with a guide. During the day, it wasn't that creepy. At night, though, I hated passing it on my way out. That evening, I was the last person left inside. I had just finished my rounds when I heard something, a crackling noise, followed by a distant voice. Last call for departure, final call, on the board. I froze. The announcement was coming from the old ferry's speaker system. The problem that system hadn't worked in years. The wires had been cut when the ship was retired. I stepped outside to see if maybe, somehow, someone was inside the vessel. The only access was through a locked gate, and I knew it had been bolted shut before closing. But then I saw it, a dim light glowing through one of the ferry's portholes. It was faint, flickering, like an old oil lamp or a failing bulb. And then I heard the whistle, a long, drawn-out toot, like the ferry was preparing to leave the dock. At that point, I should have just left, but I couldn't move. I watched as shadows pass behind the porthole. Not just one, but several, like passengers boarding a ship. Then everything went silent. The light in the ferry flickered once and disappeared. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I told my boss about it, half expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, he got quiet. "You're not the first to hear that," he finally said. "They say the last crew never got off in time." The next few days at the museum were uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Maybe it was my imagination, but the ferry felt different, heavier, like the air around it had thickened. Then, about a week later, something else happened. I was in the museum's back office, helping sort old documents, when one of my coworkers, Janet, an older woman who'd been there for years, walked in looking pale. "Did you go near the ferry last night?" she asked. "No," I said. "Why?" She hesitated. "I found footprints on the gangway this morning." I felt my stomach drop. The ferry's entrance had been locked up for years, and no one had the key except maintenance. "Maybe it was security," I suggested. Janet shook her head. "Security never goes near the ferry. They refuse." I laughed a little, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned in and lowered her voice. I heard it too. The whistle. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the shadows in the porthole, the way they had moved, not like tourists on a tour, but with purpose, like people who knew where they were going. The next evening, I stayed late again, but I refused to go outside alone. Instead, I watched from the museum's upper floor, where I had a clear view of the ferry through the window. At exactly 9:17 p.m., the lights flickered on inside the ship again. This time, I saw more figures standing on the deck. Their shapes were dark, indistinct, but there was no mistaking it. They were there, watching. Then, the whistle blew again, and the figures moved. Not chaotically, not confused, just like before they boarded. My breath caught as the ship tilted. It was impossible. The ferry was permanently moored. It shouldn't have moved, not even an inch. But I swear on everything I know, it listed to the side, just for a moment, like it was rocking on invisible waves. Then the lights inside went out, and everything was still. I left immediately. The next morning, I found Janet again. "We need to talk," I said, and she nodded. "Yeah, I think it's leaving soon." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" Janet took a long breath. "Every few decades, the ferry tries again. It never quite makes it. But the shadows, there are more of them now. I think it's getting full." I quit that same week. I don't know if the ferry ever left, but I check the local news sometimes, half expecting to see a headline that it's vanished. Or worse, that they found something inside, and after quitting the museum, I tried to put the whole thing behind me. I moved to a new job in a different town and stopped checking the news from my old coastal haunt. I even convinced myself that Janet had been messy with me, that all those late nights had made me imagine things. But 6 months later, I got a text from an old coworker. It was a link to a local news article. The headline read, "Decommissioned ferry sinks a mysterious incident, no signs of forced entry." My stomach turned cold. The article was vague, only stating that the ferry had somehow slipped free from its moorings during the night and drifted out into the bay before taking on water and sinking. The Coast Guard investigated but found no evidence of a break-in, no storm damage, no structural failures, nothing that could explain why a ship that had been stationary for decades had suddenly moved on its own. But the worst part, a witness, an early morning fisherman, reported seeing something something impossible. He had been out on the water before dawn when he spotted the ferry in the distance. He claimed that for a few minutes before it began sinking, the deck was lined with shadowy figures, still and silent, standing shoulder to shoulder, watching the shore. By the time rescue boats arrived, the ferry was already gone, swallowed by the sea. No bodies were found. I called Janet that evening, half expecting her not to answer, but she picked up on the second ring. "You saw the news," she said. It wasn't a question. "What happened?" I asked. She exhaled. "It finally left." I didn't know what to say. She continued. "The museum director was there that morning. He said something that stuck with me." "What?" She hesitated. "He said the water where it sank was too deep." I frowned. Too deep. The old ferry route, it never went that far out. It was a short passage across the bay, but the ship didn't sink where it should have. I didn't understand. Where did it sink? Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Open water, deep ocean, far beyond where it was ever meant to go." A chill ran down my spine. I don't know where the ferry was trying to go that night, or what had been waiting for it in the darkness of the open sea. All I know is that it got there. This happened about a year ago, and I still think about it every time I walk into a crowd. It wasn't in some remote place or an abandoned building. It was in the middle of a festival, a packed, noisy, city-wide event full of food stalls, live music, and people laughing. You'd think that would be the last place you feel truly afraid. I was with my best friend, Jen, and we were weaving through the crowd, looking for something deep-fried to eat. We weren't drunk, just that kind of giddy you get when you're surrounded by happy people, warm lights, and the smell of funnel cake. We stopped at a stall selling homemade jewelry when I felt it. That's all. Felt that tight, uncomfortable pressure on the back of your neck when someone is watching you. I turned my head slightly, pretending to admire a row of rings, and that's when I saw him. He was standing in the middle of the street, just past the glow of the overhead lanterns, dressed in a completely ordinary way. Jeans, a dark hoodie, hands in his pockets. But what froze me was his face. He wasn't blinking, not in a casual, "Oh, I just happened to catch him mid-steer" way. His eyes were wide, too wide, like someone had pulled back his eyelids and forgotten to let go. He didn't move, didn't fidget, didn't even shift his weight like people normally do when they stand. He just stared, his pupils locked onto mine. I swallowed and turned back to Jin, trying to shake it off. Maybe he was just zoning out. Maybe I was overthinking. But when I glanced back, he was closer, not walking, not weaving through the people, just suddenly standing about 5 feet closer than before. And still, he didn't blink. My stomach flipped. I grabbed Jin's arm and muttered something about checking out the next stall. We moved, pushing deeper into the crowd, but the feeling didn't go away. I glanced back again. He was closer. We hadn't stopped. We hadn't slowed down. But he was just a few feet behind us now, face expressionless, body completely still, except for the fact that he kept getting closer. I panicked. I grabbed Jin's wrist and said, "Run." We darted between people, past booths, through a group of teenagers taking selfies, until we were breathless. We ducked into the nearest tent, which turned out to be selling handcrafted masks. Jin was confused, asking what was wrong, and I told her. The second I finished, she frowned. "That guy," she whispered, "the one at the hoodie." I nodded. Her face paled. "I saw him too," she said, "but like, before you did, when we were at the jewelry stall, he was standing behind you, just staring, and I swear, I never saw him move." We peeked out from the tent. He was standing right in the middle of the walkway, just outside the tent entrance. I swear to God, his eyes were still locked onto mine. That was it for me. I grabbed Jin and we bolted, shoving through the crowd until we found a security station. I didn't know what to say. What could I even report? A man is looking at me weird. But when I turned back, expecting to see him there, standing just outside the security station, he was gone, vanished. We waited around for a while, nervously scanning the crowd, but he never showed up again. The festival ended. We went home. Life moved on. But I swear, sometimes, when I'm in a crowd, just for a split second, I catch a glimpse of someone standing too still, staring too hard. For weeks after the festival, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. At first, it was just paranoia. I'd walk down a crowded sidewalk and suddenly feel the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I'd turn, expecting to see him, but there was always just a sea of normal people, tourists, commuters, families. Nothing out of place, nothing except the creeping sensation that somewhere in the crowd, someone was standing too still. Jen tried to reassure me, saying it was probably just a weird guy with no social awareness. Maybe he was high, she suggested, shrugging it off. Or trying to mess with people. It's creepy, but that's all. But then she called me at 2 a.m. She wasn't the type to freak out easily, so when I picked up and heard her voice shaking, I sat straight up in bed. He was outside my apartment. I felt my stomach drop. She said she'd gone out to throw the trash away, and when she turned back toward her building, she saw him, standing under the flickering streetlight, hands still in his pockets, eyes locked onto hers. Still, now blinking, she ran inside and locked the door. By the time she worked up the nerve to check through the peephole, he was gone. That was enough for me. I told her I was coming over, no arguments. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and was out the door in minutes. It was a 15-minute drive to her place. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a dark figure sitting in my backseat. When I pulled up to her apartment building, she was already outside, pacing near the entrance. "He's gone," she said before I could even ask. But she didn't look relieved. She looked worse. "What happened?" I demanded. She hesitated, then swallowed hard. "I don't think he walked away," she whispered. I frowned. "What do you mean?" I never saw him leave." We stood there in silence, the street unnervingly quiet for the middle of the night. I looked around, scanning the alleyways, the parked cars, the windows above us. No sign of him. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching. That night, I stayed at Jin's place. Neither of us slept. Days passed, then weeks. Nothing happened. No sign of the man who never blinked. Maybe he'd gotten bored. Maybe it really was just some kind of sick joke. And then, one night, I woke up in my apartment to a soft tapping sound. Not at my door, at my window. I live on the 3rd floor. I sat up, my heart slamming in my chest. For a few seconds, I was too afraid to turn my head. The sound came again, tap, tap, tap. Finally, I forced myself to look. There, standing on the fire escape, was him. No emotion, no movement, no blinking, just staring at me through the glass. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. My body locked up completely. Then, without making a single sound, he tilted his head, not like a person does when they're curious, or like something trying to imitate human movement and getting it just slightly wrong. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. Not climbing down, not retreating, just gone. I barely slept after that. Moved out a month later. I don't know who or what he was. I don't know how he found me, or why he finally left. Moving didn't help. For a few months, things were quiet. I kept telling myself it was over, that maybe, somehow, whatever he was had lost interest. But deep down, I knew better. It was late November when it happened again. I was coming home from a friend's place, taking the bus back to my new apartment. It was raining, the kind of steady drizzle that makes everything feel muted. There weren't many people on the bus, just an old man staring out the window, a woman nodding off in her seat, and a teenager with headphones in. And him. At first, I didn't see him. I had my hood up, my head down, scrolling through my phone. But then the feeling crept over me, that familiar, icy awareness. I looked up. He was sitting across from me, that right across, a few rows back, but close enough that I could see his face, see those impossibly wide, unblinking eyes fixed on mine. I sucked in a sharp breath. My grip tightened on my phone. The bus rumbled on, hitting potholes, slowing at red lights. Nobody else seemed to notice anything. He didn't move, didn't shift, didn't twitch, didn't blink. I pressed my back against the seat, my mind racing. Should I get off early, stay on until I was near my building? But then what? Would he just follow me home again? A few minutes later, the bus jolted to a stop. I had maybe 5 seconds to decide, so I acted. As soon as the doors hissed open, I bolted. I pushed past the naughty woman, practically leaped onto the sidewalk, and took off running. The bus pulled away behind me. I risked a glance over my shoulder. He wasn't there. My chest was heaving, my heart hammering in my ears. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the street. Empty, just rows of closed shops, flickering streetlights, puddles reflecting the neon glow of a diner sign. Then he stayed on the bus. I waited for a few minutes, just to be sure. When nothing happened, I exhaled shakily and started walking home, keeping my head on a swivel. I barely made it a block before I saw him again, standing beneath a streetlight just ahead of me. I hadn't heard him approach, hadn't seen him move, but there he was. Same expressionless face, same unblinking stare, same impossible stillness. My stomach twisted into knots. I turned on my heel and ran the other way. I didn't care where, I just needed to get away. My footsteps echoed against the wet pavement as I sprinted down an alley, cutting through side streets, my breath ragged. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment building, fumbling with my keys, shoving the door open, slamming it behind me. I didn't look out the window, didn't check to see if he was outside. I just locked every door, every window, and sat in the middle of my living room, hands shaking. For the first time, I truly let myself wonder, what if he is a human? For days, I was on edge. I avoided buses. I avoided going out alone. But eventually, my fear dulled. Maybe I had lost him again. Then, one night, I was brushing my teeth when I caught something in the mirror. A shape, not behind me, beside me, like someone was standing just out of sight, inches away. I spun around. Nothing but my reflection. For a split second, just a fraction of a second, it wasn't copying me. It was standing completely still, and it wasn't blinking. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what he is. This happened a few months ago when I had a late night layover at a regional airport. It wasn't one of the major hubs, just a smaller airport that mostly handled domestic flights. My connecting flight had been delayed, and the terminal was almost empty by the time I got through security. Most of the shops and restaurants had already closed. A few passengers dozed in uncomfortable seats, their faces lit by the cold glow of their phones. A janitor mopped the floor near an abandoned coffee stand, and the only sign of life was the occasional announcement over the intercom. I found my gate and settled into a row of seats near the window, watching the tarmac. My flight was the last one of the night. The boarding area was deserted, except for one other passenger sitting a few rows away. She was an older woman, maybe in her late 60s, wearing a deep green coat with a brooch pinned to the collar. Her suitcase sat neatly at her feet. I didn't think much of her at first, just another traveler waiting to get home. But then I noticed something odd. She wasn't moving, not shifting in her seat, not scrolling through a phone, not adjusting her coat, just sitting there, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. I tried not to let it bother me, but there was something unnerving about her complete stillness. The delay dragged on, and I leaned my head back, closing my eyes for a bit. When I opened them again, she was gone. I figured she must have gotten up to use the restroom, but something made me glance around the terminal. No sign of her, just the janitor, still mopping the same spot, and the board gate agent scrolling through his phone. Then came the boarding call. I grabbed my bag and made my way to the jet bridge. As I stepped onto the plane, I glanced down the aisle, and there she was, a woman in the green coat, sitting in a window seat near the back, hands still folded, still staring straight ahead. I felt a weird prickle of unease. I hadn't seen her board. She hadn't been ahead of me in line. The plane wasn't full, so I took my seat a few rows away, keeping her in my peripheral vision. The flight attendants went through their safety briefing, and the engines rumbled to life. As we took off, I looked over at her again. She was gone. The set was empty. No sign that anyone had been there at all. I don't know how to explain it. I knew what I saw. I'd even asked the flight attendant if someone had moved seats, but she just gave me a polite smile and said, "This row was empty when we took off." I didn't sleep a wink the rest of the flight. When we landed, I waited until most of the passengers had departed before getting up. As I stepped into the jet bridge, I glanced back one last time. The green coat was draped over the empty seat, and the brooch was missing. I stood frozen in the jet bridge, my brain scrambling for a logical explanation. Maybe she'd gone to the bathroom mid-flight and never came back. Maybe I had dozed off and missed her leaving, but none of it made sense. The flight attendant had said the row was empty, and yet her coat was still there. Passengers shuffled past me, eager to get off the plane and head to their destinations. I forced myself to move, stepping into the terminal. It was eerily quiet, even for this late hour. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, reflecting off the polished floors. I turned back toward the gate. The flight crew had already begun their final walkthrough. One of the attendants, a young guy with tired eyes, was coming out of the plane. I hesitated, then approached him. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "I think someone left their coat in the back row." He frowned. "Which row?" "Near the window, toward the rear." A woman was sitting there. He gave me a puzzled look. That section was empty. I felt my stomach tighten. No, I saw her. Older lady, green coat, brooch on the collar. She was there before we took off. I swear. The attendant glanced back into the plane, then gave a small, uneasy chuckle. "You're not the first person to say something like that." A cold chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Every now and then, passengers report seeing someone in the back of the plane on the last flight of the night. Usually an older woman, always in a green coat. But there's never anyone actually seated there." I stared at him. "That's not funny. I'm not joking." He exhaled sharply. "Look, I don't know if it's some weird trick of the light or just flight exhaustion messing with people's heads, but it happens more often than you think." I wanted to argue, to insist that she was real, that I had seen her waiting in the terminal, sitting right across from me, but my mouth felt dry, and my heart was beating too fast. I forced out one more question. "What happens to the coat?" The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably. "Usually, it's just gone when we come back to clean the plane. Vanishes overnight. No one's ever claimed it." That was all I needed to hear. Without another word, I turned and walked quickly toward baggage claim. I never looked back. Weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I started searching online, digging through old forum posts and travel blogs, trying to find anything about the woman in the green coat. And then I found it. A news article buried in an old local paper's archives. Passenger found deceased at airport terminal. Flight home delayed indefinitely. The story was from decades ago. An elderly woman had been waiting for the last flight of the night, just like me. But before boarding, she had suffered a fatal heart attack in the terminal. Her personal effects had been collected: a green coat, a suitcase, a brooch pinned to her collar, swear, she never made it on the plane, and yet, somehow, she is still trying. After finding the article, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled into my bones. The woman in the green coat wasn't just some shared hallucination or trick of the mind. She had been real, or at least, she had been once. I tried to put it behind me, but the feeling of being watched never left. It was subtle, an occasional flicker in my peripheral vision, a phantom sense of someone sitting nearby when I was alone. It got worse at night, especially when I traveled. A month later, I had to take another late night flight. Different airline, different airport, but as soon as I stepped into the terminal, a wave of dread hit me like a wall. I found my gate and sat down, scanning the waiting area. It was nearly empty, just a few scattered passengers slumped over their phones. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that I was letting an old story get to me. Then I saw her get, not right away, more like my brain filled in the details a second too late, like she had been there the whole time but I just hadn't registered it. Same green coat, same knit suitcase at her feet, but something was different this time. She was face MA. Before, she had always been motionless, staring blankly ahead, but now, her head was tilted just slightly in my direction. I couldn't see her eyes under the dim airport lighting, but I could feel them. I looked away, my pulse thudding in my ears. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I turned back. She was closer, not by much, just a few rows forward, but I hadn't heard her move. I hadn't seen her stamp. I grabbed my bag and stood up. I wasn't waiting for this flight. I wasn't waiting for any flight. I was leaving, going home, taking the first taxi out of there. I turned toward the main concourse and nearly slammed into a security guard. He gave me an odd look. "You okay?" I swallowed hard, nodding. I think I need to reschedule my flight. His gaze flicked over my shoulder, then back to me. Long-bagged. I risked a glance behind me. She was gone. The set was empty. No suitcase. No coat. Nothing. The guard sighed, like he had seen this before. Yeah, he muttered, almost to himself. Happens sometimes. I didn't ask what he meant. I just left. I don't fly at night anymore. I don't take last flights, red eyes, or layovers in quiet terminals. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm half asleep, I hear the soft rustle of a coat shifting nearby, and I know she's still waiting. I never take the bus super late at night. I usually drive, but my car had broken down earlier that day and my only option was the city bus. It was a little past 2 a.m. and I was the only one at the stop. The streets were quiet, just the occasional distant sound of a siren or a drunk stumbling home. When the bus pulled up, it was mostly empty except for the driver and a single passenger, a woman sitting in the very back. She was wrapped in a long coat, her face obscured by the dim light. I sat near the middle, a few seats away from the exit. The driver didn't acknowledge me, just stared ahead, gripping the wheel tightly. That should have been my first clue. A few minutes into the ride, I heard movement from the back. The woman had shifted slightly, her posture stiff. I didn't think much of it at first, until I realized something weird. She wasn't reflected in the window. I blinked, thinking my tired brain was playing tricks on me. But no, as the city lights passed by, I could see my reflection clear as day, yet where hers should have been, there was only the empty seat. The bus rumbled on, and I forced myself to keep my eyes forward. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Then I heard her whisper, not loud, not directed at me, just a low, breathy murmur, like she was speaking to someone who wasn't there. I glanced at the driver, expecting him to react. He didn't. His knuckles were white on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road like he was afraid to look anywhere else. Then the bus hit a red light. The murmuring stopped. The silence was worse. I felt her eyes on me. My skin crawled, but I forced myself not to turn around. The bus started moving again. Another stop was coming up. Thank God. I yanked the cord, signaling to get off, not caring if it was too early for my destination. The driver sighed. It wasn't relief, more like resignation. The doors hissed open. I bolted out. As I walked away, I risked one last glance. The woman had moved. She was now sitting in the seat closest to where I had been, staring directly at me through the window. And she smiled. The bus pulled away, disappearing into the night. I walked the rest of the way home, heart pounding, refusing to look behind me. I still don't know what I saw that night. I tried to forget about that night. I told myself I had imagined things, that sleep deprivation and paranoia had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. Still, life went on and my car got fixed, and I didn't have to rely on the bus anymore. Weeks passed, then months, and then I saw her again. It was late, just past midnight. I had been out with some friends, and since I'd had a few drinks, I decided to take a rideshare home instead of driving. As I waited on the curb, watching from my driver's car, I felt it, that same feeling, like someone was watching me. I turned my head slowly across the street. waited at a dimly lit bus stop. She sat, same log coat, same stiff posture, and even from that distance, I could feel her eyes on me. The bus pulled up in front of her, blocking my view. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the doors open, expecting her to get on. But when the bus pulled away, she was gone and just an empty bench. My phone buzzed. It was my driver telling me he'd arrived. I nearly jumped out of my skin at the sound. I got in the car and tried to calm my nerves, but something felt off. The driver was silent, eyes locked on the road, hands gripping the wheel tightly, just like that bus driver. I swallowed hard. Hey, oh, everything okay? He didn't answer right away. Then, in a low, strained voice, he asked, did you see her too? My blood ran cold. I didn't respond. I couldn't. He nodded, like that was answer enough. I'd seen her before, he murmured. Twice now. Always late at night. Always just watching. I clutched my hands together to stop them from shaking. What happens if she follows you? I asked, barely above a whisper. His grip on the wheel tightened. You don't let her in. We drove the rest of the way in silence. When we reached my place, he looked at me in the mirror. Don't take the bus at night, he said, and if you see her again, don't look too long. I nodded numbly and got out, locking my door the second I stepped inside. I didn't sleep at night, and I don't take ride shares anymore either, because last night, I woke up to a soft whisper outside my bedroom window. I barely slept after that night. Every sound, every shadow made my skin crawl. I kept telling myself it was my imagination, that maybe the drinks had messed with my head, but deep down, I knew better. And then, 3 nights later, my phone rang at exactly 2:07 a.m. I was in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that nothing was wrong, when the sound shattered the silence. The caller ID said unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But something in me, some deep, terrible instinct, knew who it was before I even brought the phone to my ear. I didn't say anything. For a moment, there was just silence. Then, a whisper, soft, like breath against the speaker. You saw me. I shot upright, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might stop. My throat went dry, my hands clammy against the phone. Then the whisper came again, barely audible but unmistakable. You let me see you too long. I hung up and threw the phone across the room. It clattered onto the floor, the screen still glowing. I sat there, frozen, barely breathing. My whole body was screaming at me to move, to do something, but I just sat, staring at my door, waiting. And then 3 slow knocks, soft and deliberate, right outside my bedroom door. Not my apartment door, my bedroom door. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. Then came the whisper again, this time right outside the door, inches from where I sat. You don't let me in. My chest tightened. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the silence stretched. The air grew heavy, suffocating. Then nothing. No footsteps. No retreating presence. Just absence. I sat awake until morning, every light on, clutching a knife I knew was useless. When the sun rose, I finally forced myself to move. Slowly, I crossed the room, my breath shallow. I gripped the handle. The door was unlocked. I know I locked it. I know I did. I haven't slept since, and I know this isn't over. I used to take the same city bus home from work every night. It was a late route, the kind that picked up stragglers from closing shifts, a few night owls, and the occasional person who just had nowhere else to be. I never thought much about it until the night I stayed on too long. That night, I had my earbuds in, half dozing in my usual window seat. The bus was emptier than usual, just me and a guy near the front, plus the driver. I recognized both of them. The man up front was an older guy with tired eyes and a fraying jacket. I'd seen him before, always getting off near the same stop as me. The driver was new. I hadn't seen him before, but that wasn't uncommon. I must have drifted off, because when I looked up, we were well past my stop, way past. The city streets had given way to dark roads lined with nothing but trees. Hey, I called, standing up. I think I missed my stop. The driver didn't react. He just kept driving, his eyes fixed ahead. The old man at the front turned and looked at me. His expression was strange, tired, yes, but also something else. Resigned. You should sit down, he said. Something about his tone sent a chill through me. Where are we going? I asked. The driver didn't answer. The bus rumbled in. No stops, no turns, just a straight, endless road. The lights inside the bus flickered, and for the first time, I noticed something odd. There were no ads on the ceiling, no maps, no route information, just smooth metal and flickering fluorescence. I pulled out my phone. No signal. The old man sighed, like he had seen this before. You weren't supposed to stay on, he murmured. What does that mean? I demanded. But before he could answer, the driver finally spoke. You'll have to get off soon. His voice was was strange, flat, and motionless. The bus was slowing. I looked out the window. Nothing, just a stretch of road disappearing into the dark. No houses, no streetlights, not even a shoulder to stand on. No, I said, I want to go back. The driver didn't respond. The old man stood. His movements were slow, reluctant. This is the last stop, he said. The bus halted. The doors hissed open. Darkness outside. Deep, endless, waiting. I stayed frozen. The old man gave me one last look. Then, with a sigh, he stepped off. The doors shut behind him. The bus groaned and pulled forward again. I turned in my seat, watching through the back window. The man stood on the empty road, watching us go. Then, as the bus pulled further away, I saw it. Shadows closing in around him, silent and shifting. He didn't move, didn't try to run, just stood there as the dark swallowed him whole. I turned back to the driver. Take me back, I whispered. This time, he listened. I got off at the next stop, stumbling into the cold air, barely able to breathe. When I turned to look back, the bus was gone. I never saw it again, never found that route again. But sometimes, late at night, when I walk past the stop where I used to catch it, I think I see something down the road. Headlights, far off, waiting. For a while, I tried to put it out of my mind. Maybe I'd imagined some of it. Maybe I had just been exhausted, and my brain had twisted an ordinary, eerie experience into something worse. But deep down, I knew better. I stopped taking the bus after that night. I carpooled, I walked, I took rides from friends, anything to avoid standing at a stop past midnight, watching for headlights that I prayed wouldn't appear. And it worked for a time. Then, last week, something happened. I was walking home from a friend's place. My usual paranoia kept at bay by the noise of the city around me. It was early, barely past 10. Streetlights glowed yellow, cars rushed by, and everything felt normal. Then, ahead of me, I saw it. A bus. Not just any bus. That bus. It was parked in a stop that hadn't existed before. Its doors open, its interior lights flickering weakly. There were no route numbers, no destination sign, just a blank, darkened display. And inside, sitting in my old window seat, was the old man. He was staring at me. I froze. Everything in me screamed to turn around, to run, to not acknowledge what I was seeing. But I didn't move. The driver, the same driver, turned his head slightly like he had just noticed me standing there. His expression didn't change. Then, without a sound, the doors hissed shut. The bus pulled away from the curb. No engine noise, no exhaust, just a whisper of tires on pavement. I stood there, heart pounding, watching as it drove down the street and disappeared around the corner. I don't know why it came back. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the old man staring at me from that window seat. Not pleading, not afraid, just watching. The next morning, I convinced myself I had imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, lingering fear from that night months ago. It had to be one of those things. But I also knew better than to take chances. I changed my walking routes, avoided public transit altogether, even switched up my work schedule so I wouldn't be out late. For a while, it helped. Then, 3 nights ago, my phone rang. I was in bed, drifting between sleep and wakefulness when the buzzing jolted me fully awake. The caller ID just said unknown number. I never answered those, but something about this one made my stomach twist. I let it ring. It stopped, then started again and again. On the 4th call, I picked up. I didn't say anything, just held the phone to my ear, waiting. For a moment, there was only static, faint, distant, like an old radio trying to find a signal. Then I heard it, a voice. Last stop. I hung up, tossed the phone across the room, but the calls didn't stop. I turned the phone off, but an hour later, it was ringing again. Still off. It still vibrated across my nightstand. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I changed my number. It didn't matter. That night, at exactly 12:03 a.m., my new phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer, but a message came through immediately after. One image, a blurry, grainy photo of a bus stop. My bus stop, the same one I used to wait at every night. The street was empty, but in the distance, I could see something. Headlights, coming closer. I didn't go outside. I didn't even look out my window. I just sat in the dark, heart pounding, waiting for the next call. I used to work the closing shift at a small, family-owned pharmacy in a quiet part of town. It wasn't a 24-hour place, and most of our customers were elderly folks picking up prescriptions before we shut our doors at 9 p.m. The pharmacy had been around for decades, and the owners had inherited it from their parents. It had that old-world charm, wooden shelves, an ancient cash register, and a tiny back room where we kept extra stock. The building itself had a 2nd floor, but as far as I knew, it had been abandoned for years. There was an old wooden staircase in the back, behind a locked door. The owners told me it used to be a small apartment, but it had been empty for decades. No one goes up there, they said, brushing it off whenever I asked. One night, I was finishing up the closing routine. My coworker had already left, and I was alone. The last customer had picked up their prescription, and I was finishing paperwork at the counter. It was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerators. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate thump from upstairs. I froze, my pen hovering over the page. The noise wasn't the creak of an old building settling, it was heavier, like a footstep. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe an animal had gotten in, a raccoon, a bird, but then it came again, a thump, thump. It was unmistakably footsteps, slow, measured, pacing. I told myself it was just my imagination, but then the sound changed. Scrape. It was the sound of something dragging across the floor directly above me. My blood ran cold. I had worked here for over a year, and I had never heard a single noise from upstairs. I grabbed my phone, ready to call someone, but then something else happened. The old wooden staircase door, the locked door, gave a single, slow creak. I turned my head toward it, hard hammering. It had always been locked, always, but now it was slightly ajar, not open enough to see inside, just enough to show me it wasn't locked anymore. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my bag and bolted for the front door, fumbling with my keys as I nearly crashed through it. I locked it behind me, sprinted to my car, and drove off without looking back. The next morning, I told my boss what had happened. His face turned pale. That door should never be open, he said quietly. Then, after a pause, we'll change the locks. I never got an answer to what or who was up there, but I never worked another closing shift again. After that night, I refused to close alone. The owners didn't question it, and for a while, things seemed normal. They changed the locks on the back door, though I never got a clear answer as to why it had been opened in the first place. But normal didn't last long. A few weeks later, I started noticing small things. Items would be slightly out of place when I opened in the morning. Nothing major, just little shifts. A bottle of aspirin facing the wrong way, a box of cough syrup sitting on the wrong shelf. At first, I blamed my coworkers, but then one morning, I found something that made my stomach drop. A dusty footprint. It was on the floor behind the counter near the prescription shelves. Not a shoe print, a bare footprint, too large to be from any of us who worked there. And the worst part, there was no dust anywhere else, just that single, perfect print. I told my boss. He looked at it, frowned, then wiped it away with his shoe. Probably nothing, he muttered, but I saw it on his face. He didn't believe that. That night, I left as soon as my shift ended, not even waiting for my coworker to finish locking up. As I got into my car, I glanced back at the building, and I saw it, a shadow in the upstairs window. It moved, just barely, a flicker of motion, like someone shifting their weight. I felt an ice-cold wave of dread, but I couldn't look away. The window was grimy, but I could make out just enough to tell that something, or someone, was up there. Then the light in the window flickered, not like a normal light. It was dim, an almost unnatural glow, as if something was moving in front of it, blocking it. I don't remember driving home. I just remember locking my apartment door and shoving a chair under the handle before lying awake until dawn. The next day, I called in sick. When I finally worked up the courage to go back a few days later, I found out the pharmacy had been broken into. Nothing had been stolen, though no cash, no drugs, nothing. Just one thing was different. The new lock on the back staircase door. It was broken, not picked, broken, as if someone had forced their way through. The owners didn't say much, but they had a contractor come in the next day. I overheard something about sealing it up for good. A week later, a heavy wooden panel covered the door, bolted straight into the wall. No one ever talked about it again, and no one ever went upstairs. I quit a month later. To this day, I don't know who or what was up there. I don't know if it was a squatter, something worse, or just my imagination. But I do know one thing. That night when I saw the shadow, I don't think it was looking out at the street. I think it was looking directly at me. I thought leaving the pharmacy would give me peace. That once I quit, the unease, the wrongness would fade, like a bad dream. But it didn't. For weeks after, I had the same nightmare. I was back inside the pharmacy, standing behind the counter. The store was empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Then, like clockwork, I'd hear it. Thump, thump, footsteps above me. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I would try to move, to run, but my feet wouldn't budge. The sound would grow louder, coming closer. But instead of staying overhead, it would start moving downward, down the staircase. And just like in real life, the door that should be locked, should be sealed shut, would creak open, just enough to show darkness beyond. Something would shift in the shadows. Something would step closer, but I never saw it. Because just as I was about to, just as my eyes were forced to adjust, I'd wake up, heart hammering, drenched in sweat. It happened over and over. A suffocating sense of dread followed me, even when I was awake. I stopped sleeping properly, stopped going near that part of town altogether. But here's the part that still haunts me. One night, around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A text message. I groggily reached for my phone, my body heavy with exhaustion. The number was unknown me. The message was simple. Why did you leave? Every hair on my body stood on end. I stared at the screen, sleep vanishing instantly. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I wanted to believe it was a prank, but deep down, I knew better, because as I stared at that message, heart pounding, another came through. A single image, a photo of the pharmacy, but not just any photo. It was taken from inside the store. The angle was low, just behind the counter, exactly where I used to stand. I could see the empty aisles, the faint reflection of the glowing exit sign in the front window, and just at the edge of the frame, almost out of sight, was the staircase door, wide open. I threw my phone across the room. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went to the police. I showed them the messages, the photo, told them everything. They took my statement, but there wasn't much they could do. The number was untraceable. The pharmacy hadn't reported any break-ins. There was no evidence of anything unnatural. I asked if they could check the building anyway. They did, and when they called me later that afternoon, their tone was of the door was locked. They said it sealed up tight, just like the owner said it was. I almost felt relief, almost, until the officer hesitated, but he added, his voice uncertain, we found something weird upstairs. I didn't want to ask, but I did. His answer, a mattress, old, stained, shoved into the corner. Next to it, a pile of empty water bottles, wrappers from snacks we didn't even sell at the pharmacy, and on the floor, deep, uneven scratches in the wood, like something where someone had been dragging their nails across it. I hung up. I didn't want to know more. I changed my number the next day, moved to a new apartment 2 weeks later. I haven't been back to that pharmacy since, but sometimes, late at night, I think about that room, about the messages, about the photo, and about the question I never answered. Why did I leave? Because something up there, something in that room, wanted me to stay. A few months ago, I went to an art museum alone. It was something I did often, wandering through exhibits, letting my mind drift, losing myself in colors and brushstrokes. The museum had a cafe on the second floor, tucked away behind a glass wall. It wasn't crowded that day, just a few other visitors quietly drinking coffee, flipping through exhibition brochures. I ordered a tea and took a seat near the window, overlooking the courtyard below. A pianist played softly in the distance, just background ambience. The air smelled like espresso and fresh pastries. I was halfway through my drink when I noticed a man sitting a few tables away. He wasn't eating or drinking, just sitting, hands folded, staring at me. At first, I assumed I had something on my face. I wiped my mouth with a napkin, glanced at my reflection in the window. Nothing seemed off. I looked back. He was still watching. I avoided eye contact and pulled out my sketchbook, hoping he'd lose interest. But he didn't. I could feel his gaze, unwavering. Minutes passed. Then he stood up. I tensed, pretending to be engrossed in my drawing. But instead of leaving, he walked over and sat down across from me. No greeting, no hesitation, just settled in as if he belonged there. Up close, he looked rugged. His skin was too smooth, his lips just slightly too thin. His expression never changed. You don't remember me, do you? He said. His voice was flat, almost mechanical. I forced a polite smile. I think you have me mistaken for someone else. He shook his head, slow and deliberate. No, I don't. I pushed back from the table slightly, heart pounding. I really think you do. He blinked once, too slow. Then he said, you left the door open. The air felt suddenly cold. I had no idea what he meant. I was sure I had locked my apartment before coming here, but now doubt crept in like an unwanted draft. I swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about. He smiled. It was the first change in his expression. It was wrong, too. Like he was mimicking something he had seen, not something he felt. Then, as if satisfied, he stood up and walked away. I sat there, frozen, watching him disappear into the museum. I waited a few minutes before grabbing my things and leaving. When I got home, my apartment door was locked, exactly as I had left it, but inside, on my kitchen counter was a single museum cafe napkin. That night, I barely slept. I told myself I had just imagined things, that maybe I had picked up the napkin myself without remembering. But the unease gnawed at me, the way he had spoken, the way he had looked at me, the way he had known something about me that he shouldn't have. I double-checked my locks before bed, twice. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. It was just a weird encounter, right? Some strange guy trying to mess with me. It didn't mean anything. Then I got a text. Unknown number. You still leave the door open. My stomach turned. I hadn't given anyone my number. I barely even posted on social media. How did he find me? I locked my phone, shoved it into my pocket, and tried to breathe. I wasn't going to panic. Not yet. Instead, I decided to retrace my steps. Maybe I had left my door open at some point and didn't realize. Maybe this was some elaborate prank. So I went back to the museum. The cafe was exactly as I had left it. Quiet. There was no sign of him. I asked the barista if She remembered a man sitting near me the day before. She frowned. "You were sitting alone," she said. "No, there was a man. He sat right over there." I pointed to the table. She shook her head. "I don't remember anyone sitting there." My skin prickled. Maybe she just hadn't noticed him. Maybe he had been too quiet, too still. Or maybe. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. "Unknown number. You shouldn't have come back." I turned around so fast I nearly knocked over a chair. My eyes scanned the cafe, the museum lobby, the glass doors leading outside. He wasn't there, but I knew he was watching. I left immediately. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept my lights on, my bedroom door locked. I even set up a small barricade of furniture near my front door, just in case. At 3:12 a.m., my doorbell rang. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, the sound of paper sliding under my door. I waited until morning to check. A single museum cafe napkin. On it, in neat, deliberate writing, "The door is still open." I moved out a week later. To this day, I don't know how he found me. I don't know who he was. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I hear footsteps outside my new apartment. I told myself it was over, that moving away had solved it, that he, whoever he was, couldn't follow me forever. But the fear never fully left. Every knock at the door made my stomach clench. Every unfamiliar number that called me made my skin crawl. For months, nothing happened. No texts, no napkins, no signs that he had ever existed outside of my paranoia. Until last week. It was a normal evening. I had just gotten home from work, tired, hungry. I kicked off my shoes, set my bag down, and flicked on the kitchen light. And that's when I saw it. A single museum cafe napkin, sitting on my kitchen counter, exactly where I had found the first one. I froze. My apartment was locked. The windows were shut. Nothing looked disturbed, but he had been here. I picked up the napkin with trembling fingers. This time, there was no message, just a small, perfect key taped to the center. I had never seen it before. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I took the key to a locksmith, hoping it was some generic, meaningless thing. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was a key to nothing. The locksmith examined it for a long moment, then frowned. "Where did you get this?" I hesitated. "I found it in my apartment." He gave me a strange look. "This is a master key. It's old, but whoever has this can open a lot of doors." I felt my stomach drop. "Like apartment doors?" I asked, dreading the answer. The locksmith nodded. "Yep. High security buildings, hotels, places with universal locks. You might want to check with your landlord." I left without saying another word. I didn't go home. Instead, I went to a friend's place across town and called my building manager. I kept my voice calm, casual. "Just wanted to ask about the locks," I said. "Just curious." He sighed and admitted something he probably shouldn't have. The building had one master key, used by maintenance, emergencies only, kept in a locked box in his office, or at least, it was supposed to be there. It had gone missing a few months ago. I hung up. Then my phone buzzed. "Unknown number. The door is open again." I haven't been back to my apartment since. I don't know what he wants. I don't know how he got in. I don't know how long he's been watching. But I do know one thing. Wherever I go, whatever door I close behind me, he already has the key. I work as a late shift janitor at a small regional airport. It's not a big hub, just a handful of terminals, mostly for domestic flights. By the time I get in, most of the flights have landed, and the airport is practically empty aside from a few workers and the occasional stranded traveler sleeping in a chair. It was a Thursday night, and I was pushing my cleaning cart down one of the concourses when I noticed a man sitting alone at one of the gates. No luggage, no phone, just sitting there, staring at the empty jet bridge like he was waiting for a plane that was never coming. That wasn't particularly weird. People got stuck in layovers all the time, but something about him made me uneasy. He was wearing a suit, but it looked a little wrong, like it had been borrowed or was a few decades out of fashion. His shoes were polished, but the soles looked almost untouched, like he hadn't walked much in them, and his hair, neatly combed back, didn't move at all, even though the vents overhead were blowing air strong enough to rustle the pages of an abandoned newspaper nearby. I kept my head down and kept working, but as I passed, he turned to me and said, "You should go home early tonight." His voice was calm, measured, but it made my stomach drop. I stopped and turned to him. "Excuse me, you should go home early," he repeated, tilting his head slightly like he was considering something. "You don't want to be here for what's coming." I let out a nervous chuckle, assuming he was messing with me. "Sir, if you need assistance, I can call security." He interrupted, "You won't make it to security in time." That's when I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Something about the way he said it. It wasn't a threat, but it felt like a fact. I glanced around, suddenly hyper aware of how empty the concourse was. The nearest airport worker was at the far far end of the terminal, completely out of earshot. The security desk was even farther. I forced a laugh. "Alright, sir, have a good night," I said, turning my car around. "You were almost named Robert," he said, just as I was about to leave. I stopped. My mother once told me that Robert was the name she originally picked for me before changing her mind last minute. No one else knew that. I turned back, my mouth dry. "How do you?" But the man was gone. The set was empty. The entire row of chairs was empty. There was no way he could have walked away that fast. I stood there, heart pounding, scanning the entire concourse, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no sound, just silence. I went home early that night, and the next morning, when I turned on the news, I saw that a flight that was supposed to land at my airport had crashed in the middle of the night. A maintenance issue. No survivors. I checked the schedule. That flight had been assigned to the gate where I met the man. I don't know who he was, what he was, or how he knew my name. I didn't go back to work for a few days after that. I told my boss I had food poisoning, but the truth was, I just couldn't bring myself to walk through those airport doors again. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty chair. I heard his voice. "You don't want to be here for what's coming. It should have been a coincidence, a freak accident, and an unsettling conversation overlapping by chance." That's what I told myself over and over, but I didn't believe it, because the next time I saw him, he didn't just know my name. He knew something else. A week after the incident, I forced myself to return to work. I was jumpy, but nothing weird happened that first night, or the second, or the third. By the end of the week, I was starting to convince myself that I had overreacted. Maybe the guy was just some eccentric traveler messing with me. Then, one night, as I was mopping the floor near the security checkpoint, I heard someone call my name. "Jason." My breath caught in my throat. I turned around slowly, and there he was. The same suit, the same polished shoes, the same perfectly combed back hair that didn't move. He stood just past the metal detectors, hands in his pockets, watching me. I gripped the mop handle tight. "What do you want?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied me, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "Your mother will call you at 3:14 a.m. Answer it." I blinked. What? He didn't repeat himself. He just smiled slightly, like he knew something I didn't, then turned and walked through the checkpoint. The alarm went off. No one stopped him. By the time I rushed forward to get a better look, he was already gone. The airport was practically empty at that hour, and yet somehow, he had vanished again. I told myself not to panic, not to let this guy get inside my head. Then, at exactly 3:14 a.m., my phone rang. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. I almost didn't pick up, almost let it go to voicemail, because some part of me was terrified of what she was about to say. But I answered. She was crying. My uncle, her brother, had a heart attack in his sleep. I don't know how he knew. I don't know what he is. But I know this. He isn't just some ordinary man. I stopped working nights. After my mom's call, I put in a request to switch to day shifts. My boss wasn't happy about it, but I didn't care. I couldn't be at that airport at night anymore, not when he might be waiting for me. For a while, it worked. I saw normal people, normal passengers, nothing strange. The airport during the day was full of life, full of noise. I convinced myself that whatever had happened was over. Then, last Tuesday, I saw him again. I was on my lunch break, sitting in the food court, scrolling through my phone, when I felt someone watching me. I looked up. He was sitting at a table across from mine, perfectly still, his hands folded neatly on the surface. The same suit, the same shoes, the same unmoving hair. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. "You changed your schedule," he said. His voice was calm, almost amused. I gripped my phone so hard my fingers ached. "You need to leave me alone," I said. "Whatever game this is, I've done it." He tilted his head slightly, considering me. "Jason," he said, "tomorrow at 2:07 p.m. don't step outside." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Stay away from me," I snapped. People were starting to stare. He just smiled, a slow, knowing smile. I turned and walked away, forcing myself not to run. The next day, at exactly 2:07 p.m., I was in the airport maintenance room, counting down the seconds. I wasn't going outside. I wasn't going anywhere near a door. At 2:10 p.m., my phone buzzed with a news alert. A taxi had jumped the curb outside the airport and plowed through the pedestrian walkway. 2 people were injured. 1 person was killed, a maintenance worker. I scrolled down, my stomach twisting. I knew him. His name was Chris, and he always took a smoke break around 2 p.m. I sat there, staring at my screen, feeling the blood drain from my face. I didn't know what to think. Did that man save me? Did he know something? Or was he just playing some sick game, warning me while letting someone else take my place? I don't know, and I don't want to know. I quit my job that night. I don't care if I have to work at a gas station or a grocery store. I'm never setting foot in that airport again. But the worst part, I don't think it matters, because when I got home, there was a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just my name, and inside, a single note: "I'll see you soon." When I was in college, I worked as a part-time evening custodian at my university. It wasn't the worst job. I got paid decently, and my shift started after most of the students had left for the night. My main responsibility was locking up buildings, emptying trash bins, and making sure classrooms were ready for the next day. Simple enough. One night, I was assigned to a building I didn't usually clean. It was one of the older halls on campus, mostly used for administrative offices and a few lecture rooms. The air always felt heavier in there, probably because the windows were too small to let in much light. It was a little past 10 p.m. when I finished my rounds and started locking up. I followed my usual routine, turning off lights, checking doors, making sure nothing was out of place. When I got to the last classroom on the second floor, something fell off. The chairs were all where they should be, the trash cans were empty, but the room smelled strange. Like metal, like pennies. I didn't think too much about it at first. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and started walking toward the stairs. That's when I heard it. Jingling. Not loud, not frantic, just a soft, rhythmic jingling of keys, like someone was walking behind me, casually swinging a set in their hands. I stopped. The sound stopped. I turned around. The hallway was empty. I assumed I was just hearing things and kept walking, but the moment I stepped onto the staircase, there it was again. Jingling. This time, closer. I turned fast, my heart hammering. Again, nothing. The hallway was completely still. I hurried down the stairs, trying to convince myself it was just my own keys making the noise. Maybe they had been rattling against my belt loop weirdly. That had to be it, right? I reached the bottom floor and locked the main entrance. As I stepped outside, I reflexively checked my keys just to make sure. I froze. My keys were inside my pocket. They hadn't been swinging at all. I turned, staring at the dark windows of the building, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me. But the windows were black, empty. Then, just as I was about to walk away, I heard it again. Jingling. From the other side of the locked door. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I left as fast as I could, not even bothering to check if I missed anything. I told my supervisor the next day that I wasn't comfortable working in that building alone anymore. She just gave me a tired look and nodded. "You're not the first to say that," she muttered. I wish I could say that was the end of it. That after avoiding that building, I never had to think about it again. But that's not how these things go, is it? A few months later, I was still working my usual shifts, but I had successfully managed to avoid the old admin building. Then one night, my supervisor told me one of the newer guys had called out, and they needed me to cover his routes. The same building. I told her I really didn't want to, and she just sighed. "Look, I get it. Everyone gets creeped out in there, but it's just a building. You go in, you lock up, you get out." I wanted to argue, but I needed the job, so against my better judgment, I agreed. It was past 9 p.m. when I walked up to the building, and I immediately felt that same weight in the air. The smell of old carpet and dust greeted me as I stepped inside. I reminded myself to work fast. The first floor went fine. Trash emptied, lights off, doors locked. No sounds, no keys jingling. I started to relax a little. Maybe last time had just been my imagination. Then I went upstairs. The second floor was colder than I remembered. The lights flickered slightly as I made my way down the hallway. I pushed open the last classroom door, intending to make this quick, but I stopped short. All of the chairs were pulled away from the desks, every single one perfectly spaced apart, facing the door, as if someone had dragged them all out deliberately. I had not left them that way, and I was the only one here. I told myself someone must have done it earlier in the day, maybe a meeting or some weird class experiment. I forced myself to move. I stacked a few chairs back into place, but something about the silence was wrong. It wasn't just quiet, it was like the whole building was listening. Then it happened. Jingle, soft, deliberate, from somewhere behind me. I whipped around so fast I nearly tripped over a chair. No one was there, but I felt it this time, like someone was standing just behind me, close enough that if I had turned a second later, they would have been right against my back. I did not stick around. I ran out of that room, slammed the door behind me, and rushed for the stairs. As I descended, I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking. Then, as I reached the bottom, I heard the unmistakable sound of keys jingling against glass. I turned toward the front doors. Someone was standing on the other side. At first, I thought it was a reflection, but as I stepped closer, I realized they weren't moving like I was. The figure was just standing there, barely visible in the dim outside light, and in their hand, they were swinging something. His. My breath hitched. I couldn't see their face, but I knew they were watching me. And then, they lifted their free hand and tapped on the glass. Just once, a single, deliberate knock. I bolted. I didn't even lock up properly. I just sprinted across campus, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might collapse. When I got back to the main custodial office, my supervisor saw my face and immediately immediately asked what happened. I told her. She just stared at me for a long moment. Then she did something that made my blood run cold. She reached into a desk drawer and pulled out an old set of keys. These were found in that building last year. She said quietly, "We don't know who they belong to. There's no record of the being assigned to anyone." I looked at the keys, feeling sick. Then she said the worst part. We never figured out why, but they kept showing up in weird places. Lockers, desks, even in a janitor's cart once. We put them away, and then a few weeks later, they'd be back. She stared at me, her expression unreadable. "You heard them, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I quit that job a week later. I don't know who or what was in that building with me. I don't want to know. And if you ever hear keys jingling in an empty hallway, don't turn around. After quitting, I did everything I could to put that place out of my mind. I got a new job, finished college, and moved to a different city. For a while, life is normally peaceful. I stopped looking over my shoulder, stopped jumping at the sound of keys. But some things don't stay buried. It started a year later on a random Tuesday night. I was back in my apartment after a long shift at my new job. I was unlocking my door when I heard it. Jingling, soft, distant, but there. I spun around, part hammering. The hallway outside my apartment was empty. Just silence, just shadows. I shook it off, told myself I was just paranoid. I went inside, locked the door, and tried to forget. But then it happened again and again. Sometimes at night, sometimes in the middle of the day. The sound would come from odd places. An empty stairwell, the grocery store aisle when no one was near, even inside my own apartment. I'd wake up to the faint jingling of keys, but whenever I searched for the source, I found nothing. I told myself it was just my imagination. I wanted to believe that, until the night I came home to find my old keys missing. I always left them on the kitchen counter, right by the fruit bowl. But that night, they were gone. I tore my apartment apart searching for them, panic rising with every empty drawer, every untouched shelf. And then, after nearly an hour, I found them neatly placed on my bedside table. I hadn't put them there. I knew that for a fact. Something cold settled in my stomach. I grabbed the keys with shaking hands, checking them over as if I'd find an explanation in the metal. And that's when I noticed something else. There was an extra key on the ring, one I had never seen before. A dull, old-fashioned key, slightly rusted, with no markings. I stared at it, the air in my apartment suddenly feeling too thick. My breath hitched as I thought about the keys my supervisor had shown me back at the university. The ones that had kept coming back. No, it wasn't possible. I yanked the key off the ring and threw it in the trash. I took the whole bag outside, walked to the dumpster, and shoved it in. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I checked the trash can, just to be sure. The key was gone, and I tried to tell myself someone had just taken the bag out, that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew better. And then the final straw came. A week later, I got a package in the mail. No return address, no postage, just a plain, brown envelope. I almost didn't open it. Every part of me screamed don't, but I did. Inside was a single key, the same rusted, old-fashioned key I had thrown away, and attached to it was a small, yellow piece of paper. Just 3 words, written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. "You forgot this." I moved out the next day. I don't know how it found me. I don't know what it wants, but I know one thing for sure. No matter where I go, no matter how far I run, it still has the keys. I work as a maintenance technician at a small regional airport, not one of the big, glamorous hubs, just a quiet, mid-sized airport where most flights are domestic, and we close down after the last departure of the night. My shift runs late, making sure everything is in order after passengers and crew are gone. Most nights are uneventful. Most nights. Last Friday, a late flight out to Denver was delayed due to weather. It was the last departure, meaning my shift stretched longer than usual. By the time the plane finally took off, it was nearly midnight. The terminal emptied fast, cleaners finishing up, TSA shutting down their checkpoints, the last rental car counters closing. Within an hour, the place was deserted. I was doing a final walkthrough of Concourse B when I saw him. A man, standing at gate B7. That was strange. The flight from that gate had left an hour ago, and no other flights were scheduled. He wasn't a worker. I would have recognized him. He was dressed normally, jeans, a brown jacket, nothing remarkable, but he was just standing there, staring out the window at the empty tarmac. I cleared my throat, approaching. "Sir, airport's closed. Can I help you?" He didn't respond at first, just stood, unmoving. Then he spoke, without turning. "I missed my flight." His voice was flat, expressionless. I glanced at the dark jet bridge, then at the departure screens. Everything was closed for the night. There were no flights left to board. "I'm sorry, but all flights are done for the day," I said. "You'll have to come back tomorrow." He turned to look at me then. I don't know how to describe it. His face wasn't wrong, exactly. It was just, like someone trying to look normal but missing the details. His eyes were too too still. His lips moved, but not quite in sync with the words. I missed my flight, he repeated. A cold feeling crept up my spine. Sir, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Do you have a ticket? He just stared. Then, slowly, he turned back to the window. I stepped away, pulling out my radio to call security. But before I could press the button, he was gone. Not walked away gone. Not out of sight gone. 1 second he was there. The next, the space was empty. I don't know how long I stood there, heart hammering, staring at that empty window. Eventually, security arrived, but of course, there was no one to find. They reviewed the cameras. Nothing. The footage showed me walking into the terminal, stopping at gate B7, talking to no one. No figure, no man in a brown jacket. Just me, alone, speaking to thin air. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know who or what missed their flight, but I know one thing. Next time I see someone standing alone at a darkened gate, staring at the tarmac long after the planes are gone, I'm not stopping. I didn't sleep well after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing there at gate B7, staring out at the empty tarmac. His too still posture, the way his lips moved slightly out of sync with his words, and worst of all, the way he just disappeared. I tried to brush it off, told myself I was overtired, maybe even hallucinating from exhaustion, but when I went back to work the next night, something gnawed at me. I had to check gate B7 again. The concourse was empty by 11:30 p.m., just as it should be. I made my rounds, checking lights, bathrooms, locked doors. Everything was normal, but when I reached B7, my stomach dropped. The jet bridge door was unlocked. That shouldn't have been possible. All bridges are secured once the last flight departs. I had personally seen to it the night before, but now the door stood slightly ajar, like someone had stepped out and forgotten to close it behind them. A cold draft swept through the opening. I swallowed, stepping closer. Hello. No response. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it into the jet bridge. The light cut through the dim, sterile tunnel, revealing nothing but scuffed carpet and empty space. I reached for the handle, ready to shut it and lock it properly. Then I heard it. A whisper, faint, almost like the sound of wind through a crack in the glass. But it carried words, just on the edge of understanding. I missed my flight. Every hair on my body stood on end. I swung the flashlight wildly, scanning the bridge. Empty, completely empty. But I knew, I felt, I wasn't alone. The whisper came again, closer this time. I missed my flight. I bolted. I didn't stop running until I reached the main terminal. Security found me breathless and pale, gripping the flashlight so tight my knuckles ached. I demanded they check the cameras. Again, the footage showed nothing. Just me, standing alone in the jet bridge, shining my light at something that wasn't there. They humored me, but I could tell what they were thinking. Exhaustion, stress, maybe even a breakdown. But I knew better. Over the next few days, I started asking around, casually at first. Had anyone else ever seen something strange near gate B7? Most people just shook their heads, but one of the older baggage handlers hesitated. He pulled me aside after his shift, lowering his voice. B7, yeah, there's something weird about that gate. He told me a story. Years ago, long before I started working at the airport, there was an accident. A flight departing from B7 was delayed due to bad weather, but passengers had already boarded. A nervous young man got up at the last minute, saying he needed to make a call. He stepped off the plane, down the jet bridge, and never came back. The weather worsened, and the flight took off without him. Halfway through the journey, the plane experienced massive turbulence. It never made it to its destination. No survivors. The man who missed his flight, he vanished. No record of him ever leaving the airport. No security footage of him exiting. He was just gone. For a long time, no one spoke about it, but every now and then, someone would report seeing someone waiting at gate B7 late at night. A man staring out the window at the tarmac. I don't work night shifts anymore. I traded shifts with a guy who doesn't believe in ghosts. I don't tell him why. I don't tell him what I saw or what I heard. I just know one thing. I avoided working the night shift for weeks. No more late walkthroughs. No more final checks at the concourses. I stuck to day shifts. Busy hours when the airport was alive with movement and noise. For a while, it worked. Then, last night, I got a call from my buddy Mark, the guy who took over my shift. Dude, he said, voice tight. You need to tell me what the hell happened at gate B7. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean? I asked, already knowing the answer. I saw him. Mark whispered, or something. I was closing up. Like usual, B7 was empty, but when I walked past, I felt weird, like I wasn't alone. He exhaled sharply. Then I heard it. I gripped my phone tighter. What? The whisper. I missed my flight. A chill crawled down my spine. I turned around. Mark continued, and there he was, just standing at the window, looking out at the tarmac. His voice wavered. At first, I thought it was a passenger who got locked in or something, but when I called out to him, he didn't move, didn't react at all. I could hear him pacing through the phone. I went closer. I don't know why. I just had to. I squeezed my eyes shut. Mark, he turned and looked at me. My breath caught. His voice dropped lower, barely audible. Something Something's wrong with his face, man. It's like, it's trying to be normal, but it's not. I swallowed hard. What did you do? I ran, he admitted, but when I looked back, he was gone. Just gone. Silence stretched between us. Then, Mark muttered, I checked the security cameras. I knew what he was going to say before he said it. There's nothing on them. Just me, standing there, staring at the window, talking to no one. I sat down, my legs weak. You believe me now? I do. We didn't say much after that. What else was there to say? But before he hung up, he asked something that's been clawing at my mind ever since. Do you ever wonder where he goes? I hadn't. Not really. But now I can't stop thinking about it. He never leaves through the doors. He never appears on security footage. He just vanishes. Maybe he's still waiting. Maybe he's stuck. Or maybe he finally found a way to board. I don't want to know. I don't want to ever know. So if you ever find yourself at an airport late at night, near a gate with no flights left to board, and you hear it, that whisper, I missed my flight, don't turn around. I used to work as an event coordinator, handling everything from weddings to corporate retreats. One of the more unique events I was assigned to was a silent auction for an old estate sale. The house was huge, one of those grand, crumbly mansions on the outskirts of town that had sat empty for decades. The heirs finally decided to liquidate everything, and my job was to organize the auction where people would bid on antiques, furniture, and artwork. The house was still intact but had a heavy feeling to it, the kind where the air seems too thick, too still, like a place waiting for something. The owners had left behind entire rooms filled with belongings, as if they'd simply walked away one day and never looked back. There were faded portraits lining the halls, bookshelves filled with dusty tomes, and cabinets locked tight with keys long lost. The auction itself was fairly normal at first. A small but dedicated group of collectors, antique dealers, and curiosity seekers placed their silent bids. People wandered from room to room, examining everything from old clocks to jewelry boxes. I was stationed near the main entrance, overseeing the process. Then, about an hour in, I noticed something strange. The big card had been placed on an item that wasn't on the catalog. It was an old wooden chair, tucked away in a side hallway. I knew it hadn't been included in the auction because we had cataloged every item meticulously, and this chair wasn't on any of our lists. It was unremarkable, just a plain, high-backed wooden chair with a dull patina, but someone had written a big card and placed it there. The bid was high, too high for such a simple piece. Thinking it was just a mistake, I went to remove the card, but as I reached for it, I felt something. A shift in the air, like the whole house was holding its breath. The moment my fingers touched the paper, I heard a whisper right behind me. Not words, just a sound. I turned so fast I nearly knocked over a small table, but there was no one there. Just the hallway stretching into the dimly lit rooms beyond. I forced a laugh at myself, folded up the big card, and stuffed it into my pocket. But as I walked back toward the main area, I swear I heard the sound of wood creaking, like someone shifting in a chair. The rest of the event was uneventful, except that when I checked the bid sheets at the end, another bid had appeared for the chair. A different handwriting, a different price, this time even higher. That was enough for me. I took the chair out of the auction, left it where I found it, and told the estate owners that it hadn't been listed in our catalog. They looked at each other, then at me, and one of them, a man in his 60s, just nodded. We won't be selling that, he said, and that was the end of it. I don't know who placed those bids. I don't know why the chair was never cataloged, or why the air in that hallway felt so wrong. But I do know that when I checked my pocket later that night, the big card I had taken was gone. A few weeks after the auction, I found myself thinking about that chair more than I wanted to admit. I tried to rationalize the whole thing, stress, fatigue, maybe someone playing a prank. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong with it. I avoided driving near the estate after that, but one evening, as I was heading home, I got caught in detour traffic that took me right past the house. The mansion stood there, dark and silent, its windows reflecting the fading light like blind eyes. As I passed, I thought I saw a faint glow in the hallway window. I told myself it was just a trick of the setting sun, but my stomach twisted into knots. I pressed harder on the gas and didn't look back. A few nights later, I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. I don't know why, but my heart was pounding like I'd been running. The room was quiet, and the faint glow of the streetlights filtered through the blinds. Everything seemed normal, except for the creaking sound. It was faint at first, barely audible, but as I strained to hear, it grew louder. It sounded like someone slowly rocking back and forth on a wooden chair. I froze. The sound was coming from the corner of my bedroom, where I kept a small desk and a chair. My chair, a modern cushioned office chair, didn't creak. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight, but as soon soon as I moved, the sound stopped. The corner was empty. I barely slept that night. The next day, I called the estate owner, the older man who had told me they wouldn't be selling the chair. I hesitated to explain, not wanting to sound crazy, but eventually I told him everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You shouldn't have touched it." He finally said, "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It's not just the chair." He said, "It's what sits in it." I demanded to know what he was talking about, but he only muttered something about keeping it locked away and hung up. The creaking sound came back the following night, louder this time. I moved out of my apartment the next week, leaving most of my furniture behind. I haven't heard the sound since, but sometimes, late at night, I think about that chair. I wonder if it's still in that hallway. I wonder if someone else touched it, and I wonder if someday, whatever sits in it will come looking for me again. For months after I moved, things were quiet. No creaking, no whispers, no strange feelings creeping up my spine. I started to believe that whatever had happened with that chair was behind me. Then, 3 nights ago, I found a big card in my mailbox. It was old, yellowed, with the same type of handwriting I had seen that night at the auction. No envelope, no return address, just a folded card with a single word written on it. Accepted, and I don't know how it got there. My mailbox is locked, and I live in a completely different city now. I don't even work at event planning anymore, but the moment I touched the paper, I felt that same heavy stillness I had felt in the hallway that night. I tried to throw it away, but my hands wouldn't let go of it. I had to force my fingers to unclench, and even then, it felt like something was resisting. That night, I heard the creaking again, not in my apartment, not outside. It was over the phone. My phone buzzed at 3:12 a.m. with a notification, unknown caller. No number, no location, just those 2 words, hovering on my screen like a warning. I don't know why I answered. Maybe some part of me thought it was the estate owner, that he was calling to tell me something I needed to hear. Maybe some other part of me already knew it wasn't him. I lifted the phone to my ear. Silence. Then the slow, deliberate sound of wood creaking. I hung up and turned my phone off, but the noise didn't stop. It was in the room with me, close enough that I could hear the slight shifts in weight, the subtle shift of all wood adjusting to movement. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I packed a bag and left my apartment, checking into a hotel across town. My hand shook as I locked the door behind me, and for the first time in years, I prayed that this thing, whatever it was, wasn't following me anymore. But I know better. This morning, I found another big card slipped under the door of my hotel room. There was no bid amount this time, no price, just a simple note, written in the same uneven script. "Your turn to sit. I'm leaving town. I don't know where I'm going yet, but I won't stay in one place long. If you ever see an old wooden chair in a place it shouldn't be, if you ever feel the air go still and hear wood creaking when no one is there, don't touch it. And if you find a big card with your name on it, run." This happened when I was in college, back when I still pulled all-nighters in the campus library before big exams. It was mid-semester, and I had a huge test coming up, so I decided to stay late at one of the study halls on the far side of campus, an old building that had been repurposed for general student use. It wasn't as crowded as the main library, which made it ideal for cramming. The building was a little outdated, creaky wooden floors, flickering overhead lights, and a ventilation system that groaned every few minutes. But I liked the solitude. I didn't mind the occasional weird noise. I had settled into a desk near the back of one of the larger classrooms. Most of the other students had left by 10 p.m., but I stayed, scribbling notes and flipping through textbooks, only looking up when I heard the occasional door creak in the hallway. By midnight, I was completely alone. At least, I thought I was. I had my earbuds in, lost in concentration, when something made me pause. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like a feeling, like the air in the room shifted. The hairs on my arms stood up. I took my earbuds out and listened. Silence. Then, in soft movement, I turned toward the classroom entrance. The door was cracked open slightly, but I could have sworn I had shut it all the way earlier. "Hello," I called out. No answer. I figured maybe the air vent had pushed it open, or maybe I was just imagining things. I shook it off and went back to my notes. A few minutes later, I heard a sound. A shuffle, a slow, deliberate movement, like the soft drag of a shoe across the floor. This time, it wasn't from the hallway. It was from inside the classroom. I snapped my head up, scanning the rows of empty desks. The fluorescent light above me buzzed softly, casting dim shadows over the room. Nothing looked out of place. Then I noticed something. One of the desks in the farthest row, near the back, wasn't empty anymore. Someone was sitting there. They were facing forward, completely still, hands resting on the desk. My pulse spiked. I knew for a fact that no one had been there before. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of a person sitting in the shadows, their form just barely distinguishable in the dim light. Hey, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. I felt my skin prickle. My chair creaked as I slowly stood up. The figure in the back didn't move. I took a shaky breath, grabbed my backpack, and walked toward the door as casually as I could. My footsteps echoed in the empty room. The whole time, the figure didn't react, but the second I reached the door, just Just as I was about to step out, the desk chair scraped violently against the floor. I didn't look back. I sprinted down the hallway, my footsteps pounding against the wood. When I finally reached the exit, I turned once just to check if I was being followed. The hallway was empty. I didn't go back to that study hall again. The next morning, I asked a friend about the building. He hesitated before saying, "That place. They shut it down for a few years. Some kid, years ago, had a breakdown during an exam and just never left. Security found him sitting at a desk in one of the classrooms, totally unresponsive. When they tried to move him, he freaked out, screaming, thrashing. They had to call someone to take him away. After that, people started seeing weird stuff, figures in empty rooms, chairs moving on their own. They ended up reopening it eventually, but man, I wouldn't study there alone. I never did. I told myself I was done with that building. No more late night study sessions, no more testing my nerves in an empty classroom. But some part of me, maybe the same part that made me stay in that place in the first place, kept replaying that night over and over. What if I had looked back? That thought gnawed at me for weeks. One night, against every ounce of common sense, I decided to go back. Not to study, not to stay long, just to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it. It was about 8 p.m., earlier than before, but the building was already mostly empty. The old fluorescent lights buzzed above me as I walked down the familiar hallway. My heart pounded harder with each step. I reached the door of the classroom. It was closed this time. I hesitated before gripping the handle. Slowly, I pushed it open. The room was exactly as I remembered it. Rows of desks, dim lighting, the faint hum of the vent overhead. Everything looked normal, except for one thing, the chair in the back row. It was pulled out, facing forward, like someone had just been sitting there. I swallowed hard. My brain scrambled for rational explanations. Maybe the janitor moved it. Maybe another student sat there earlier and just forgot to push it in. Then I noticed the notebook. It was on the desk where the figure had been sitting that night. An old, battered composition notebook. I stepped closer, my breath tight in my chest. The cover was worn and stained, but the edges of the pages were crisp, like someone had been using it recently. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and flipped it open. The first page was filled with cramped handwriting, and then I saw the words, "I said you." My stomach dropped. I flipped to the next page. "Why didn't you look back?" My blood turned to ice. I felt the room pressing around me. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then, a soft scrape of movement from behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly knocked over the desk. The door was closing. Not slamming, just slowly, steadily closing. I lunged for it, my fingers fumbling with the handle, and yanked it open. The hallway was empty. I ran it again. This time, I didn't stop running until I was off campus, gasping for breath in the cold night air. I don't know what I saw that night, or what left that notebook for me to find, but when I checked my own notes later, the ones I'd been writing that first night, the last page had something scrawled in the corner, something I know I didn't write. Sidioson. I tried to forget. I really did, but some things don't let you forget. I stopped pulling all-nighters, switched study spots, and even avoided that entire wing of campus. My friends noticed how jumpy I'd become, but I didn't tell them the full story. I barely admitted it to myself. For a while, it worked, the nightmares faded, and my life settled back into normal. Then, a few weeks later, I woke up to a notification on my phone. A single text from an unknown number. "Why didn't you look back?" I sat up so fast I nearly fell out of bed. My heart pounded against my ribs. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. I didn't reply. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I convinced myself it was a prank. Maybe someone had overheard me talking about that night. Maybe one of my friends was messing with me. I deleted the message and tried to shake it off. But that same night, something else happened. I was in my dorm, finishing up an assignment, when my laptop screen flickered. Just a glitch, I thought. But then the cursor started moving on its own. I watched, frozen, as a document opened. Then, letter by letter, one keystroke at a time, words began to type. Sinusote. I slammed the laptop shut and threw myself back from the desk, breathing hard. I wanted to believe it was some kind of virus, some freak tech malfunction. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't over. And then, the worst thing yet, that weekend, I went home to visit my parents. I needed a break from campus, from everything. I thought I was safe, until I heard it. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when a sound drifted through the open window. A chair scraping against the floor. My stomach turned to lead. Slowly, I sat up, heart hammering in my chest. The sound came again, a slow, deliberate drag. It was coming from downstairs, from the dining room. I grabbed my phone, barely able to hold onto it with how slick my palms were. I wanted to text my dad, wake someone up, but I was too afraid. Instead, I crept out of my room, my breath shallow, step by step. I made my way to the staircase. The house was silent, too silent. I gripped the banister and peeked down into the darkened dining room. The table was empty, but one of the chairs was pulled out. Sitting in it was the notebook, the same battered composition book I had found in the classroom. It was open, and on the fresh, untouched page, in the same cramped handwriting, were 2 words. Look back. Something moved in the shadows. I read, I never went back to that classroom. I switched colleges by the next semester, moved states, deleted my old number, and tried to erase every trace of that night from my life. I don't know if it worked. I haven't heard from it since. No more texts, no more notebooks, no more sounds of the night. But sometimes, when I'm alone, in a quiet room, studying late at night, I feel it, watching and waiting. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.